Warning. The information shared in these conversations and videos are intended for general knowledge and entertainment purposes only. It should not be considered as legal advice or professional guidance. Additionally, any documentation or references to specific content are solely for the purpose of discussion and understanding. It does not imply endorsement, promotion, or support of said content. The views expressed in these videos and/or conversation are those of the individuals involved and do not represent any official stance or opinion. The content you are about to experience may contain strong language, including explicit words and phrases. This language is used for artistic expression and may be integral to the storyline or character development. It is important to note that the use of such language does not endorse or promote offensive behavior. Viewer discretion is advised, and please enjoy the show responsibly. Disclaimer. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research. The Canadian Copyright Act, Section 29, allows an individual to use copyright-protected materials when creating a new work, such as a mashup, and to post the new work online on a site like YouTube. Fair dealing provision for specific purposes like research, private study, education, parody, satire, criticism, review, and news reporting.
Step up, step up! Yeah! We pledge! We pledge! We pledge! We pledge! Yeah! Step in the arena, mind locked and loaded. Truth on my blade, every line's exploded. You swing your words, I counter with precision. Battle of reason, this is my mission. Raise your fist, let them know. No. Raise your voice, let it blow. Woo! We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreat. Yeah. No fear, no chain, no treason. Woo. We clash our swords of reason. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreat. Yeah. No fear, no chain, no treason. Woo. We clash our swords of reason. Step back, I'm a scholar and a fighter. Every claim you throw, I strike tighter. Logic and power, I never fold. In the war of words, I'm solid gold. Raise your fist, let them know. Whoa. Raise your voice, let it blow. Woo. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. Yeah. No fear, no chain, no treason. Woo. We clash our swords of reason. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. Yeah. No fear, no chain, no treason. Woo. We clash our swords of reason. Every thought a fortress, every claim a storm. We forge a truth where chaos takes form. Ideas ignite like lightning through the night. In the war of minds, we bring the light. Step in, feel the heat. Truth is my weapon, never beat. Raise them high, break the ceiling. With a fire, with a feeling. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. No fear, no chain, no treason. We clash our swords of reason. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. No fear, no chain, no treason. We clash our swords of reason. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. No fear, no chain, no treason. We clash our swords of reason.
Welcome, everybody, to Swords of Reason right here on the Speakeasy Show, Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. This is where logic meets passion. If you're new here, the format is simple. Each debater gets 10 minutes for their opening statement, followed by 5 minutes of uninterrupted rebuttals. After that, we're going to enter the arena for a full hour of back and forth debate. This is where the arguments can clash and the iron can sharpen the iron. And finally, each side will deliver a 5-minute closing statement to lock in their case. When that's done, we're going to move into a 30-minute Q&A. I'll drop the Q&A in the chat for you guys, but keep in mind the super chats, Rumble rants, PayPal, Cash Apps, these questions will get priority. So if they fill up the entire 30 minutes, we may not get to those free chat questions. So if there's something you want guaranteed to be asked, make sure you send it through one of the priority options. And once the formal debate wraps up, we open the doors for a chaos and chill panel. This is where the community can hop in, challenge the debaters, or ask follow-ups if the debaters choose to stick around, because that part is optional for them. But it's always where things get wild regardless. Today's debate prompt: does the U.S. have an obligation to support Ukraine? And for the affirmative tonight is Dylan Burns. Dylan is a journalist, streamer, and founder of Track Ukraine, known for reporting directly from the ground in Ukraine and covering one of the most significant conflicts of our time firsthand. Through his work with offbeat research and his on location reporting, he's built a reputation for bringing viewers closer to events as they unfold rather than simply commenting from a distance. And you can find his links in the description below. And taking the negative tonight is JS Urban Adventures, a lifestyle streamer known for diving headfirst into just about everything that sparks his interest, from breaking news and cultural flashpoints to politics, philosophy, and theology. Whether he's dissecting the latest headlines, unpacking deep ideological debates, or delivering UFC fight breakdowns, or maybe dropping some spot on character impersonations, he brings a unique blend of insight, humor, and personality to every stream. And if that's not enough, he's also a host of what many viewers call the coolest Bible study on YouTube. And you can also find his link in the description below. With that being said, we're going to get right into opening statements. So, Dylan, whenever you are ready for your opening statement, I will start the timer up with your voice.
Sure. So I'm just going to try to keep it quick and brief, and I hope that my connection is good today. There's been some power outages in the Kiev area recently due to the strike, so I just hope I can keep the power on for the stream. So there's a few ways to go at this question. I can go at it from a national security standpoint, a moral question, like a values question, and a credibility angle. But the question is, does the U.S. have an obligation to support Ukraine, which is different than, saying it is morally correct to support Ukraine. This is different than saying that it is even in America's interest to support Ukraine. Both of those things, I think, could be easily argued. But I think an obligation is a different standard. This is saying that America has a responsibility to do so, either because of previous commitments, some inherent promise to its own citizens, or something that it's either agreed to with the Ukrainians themselves, with Europe, or with the more global community. So I'm going to say briefly on the national security angle, the moral angle, the values angle, before I get to the credibility angle, which I think is where the majority of this will be embedded with. From a national security standpoint, I think economic stability in Europe, our largest trading partner, is a plus for the United States. I think that the continuation of the transatlantic alliance, which has been beneficial in keeping the United States out of major interstate conflicts. It has been beneficial when the United States wanted to avoid any defensive wars. It has helped it do so. The wars that it has gotten into is offensive, and the one defensive war that we have decided to participate in, I mean, it's forced upon you. It's defensive, of course. It's not exactly being forced. In Afghanistan, a good percentage of the troops that died in Afghanistan were NATO. So I do think that maintaining this for America's national security perspective is good. The developments that America has gotten from the drone battlefield are fantastic. Patriot improvements due to its the data being shared with the United States. So I think it benefits the United States national security, which is ultimately the number one objective of the United States president, is to benefit America's national security interests when it comes to his foreign policy. Morally, I think that Ukraine fighting a moral defensive war, defending a democracy, is something that I agree with. I think that there's value shared between the United States and Ukrainians. Ukrainians have a general libertarian ethos. They're generally unruly, rambunctious people, which Ukrainian leadership has found out time and time again, both before the war and during the war, as the Ukrainian government has had to face wartime protests that have broken curfews, and they have had to secede to protest this demand. Something like this is impossible in Russia because there's no civil society in Russia. Civil society is what the Russian government says is good enough and is allowable towards its own war interest, towards its own government agenda. There's not really anybody in public that's able to say, you know what, end the war. I want to end the war. Let's end it right now. We should end the war by just leaving the country. You can say that in Ukraine. That is something you're allowed to say, and you're allowed to directly criticize the president of Ukraine. I'm in Ukraine right now. If I said Zelensky snorts line after line after line, I can joke about that if I wanted to, because reporting in Ukraine is nominally free and independent, which doesn't exist in Russia. And I think that these gains, if they went through occupation, would be lost. I also do think that the oppression of evangelicals is immoral. I think the oppression of Baptists is immoral. I think the oppression of general Ukrainian society and culture and like historical monuments is immoral. I think the trafficking of children is immoral, and I think the stealing of cultural artifacts is immoral. I think the human safari and the hunting of civilians in Kherson is immoral. So I think the moral case is easy enough. The values-based case is easy enough. As Americans, self-rule is something that I think most Americans tend to agree with. So I think most of this can be secondary. If none of these topics are things that wanted to be discussed, especially as they can get into pretty niche discussions, I can understand that. So I'll focus on the credibility angle of that. And from a credibility standpoint, the United States, from its responsibility, from its promises, should support Ukraine and kind of has to support Ukraine. Number one, after the Soviet Union collapsed, we signed an agreement in 1994. In that agreement, the Budapest Memorandum gave Ukraine our assurances that their territory would be respected after they gave up atomic weapons. The power of the sun that only one country has ever used in anger, and that is ours. We said if they give up theirs, considering that Ukrainian scientists led the way on the atomic weapons program, just like they led the way on the international space program, considering that the Ukrainians held a very large percentage of these weapons, and considering that there was already interest about reoccupation and domination of Ukraine from Russian authorities, from Yeltsin himself. Part of the reason why the negotiations happened in the first place is because the Russians were threatening invasion of Ukraine. And we offered this as an alternative. Look, you give up the nukes and the threat will go away and everything will be fine. You have our assurances. And so that's one promise we made. And you can say, well, Dylan, one assurance in 1994, that's one assurance. Okay. But we also redoubled this in Budapest a decade later. Okay. Well, one assurance in 1994 and another assurance in Budapest during the early, during this, early 2010s. That's one thing. That's another thing. But I mean, what about 2022? It was we will take as long as it takes. And so all of these things stack up to be Ukraine is clearly aligned with the United States. Ukraine sent its soldiers to Iraq. Ukraine was a friend of the United States. It has shared valuable intelligence with the United States when it comes to drone technology, the testing of American systems, and it has been a reliable partner of the American government. Whether or not they're a reliable partner to a specific political campaign or a specific individual or a specific XYZ, what was most important is that they've been a reliable partner of the United States, and the United States government has made promises to them. Now, a promise from one president and another president, that doesn't matter at all. No, the world doesn't say, well, that was a Biden promise versus a Trump promise. You can trust the Trump. Those are all American promises because those are all American presidents making those commitments. And so when America makes those commitments, we take on a responsibility that sometimes comes with obligations to support Ukraine if their territory was infringed upon, like it was in the Budapest Memorandum, and like we agreed to both do in 1994 and early 2000s and in 2022 after the full-scale invasion, and then reaffirmed in the following 2 to 3 years. I mean, even Donald Trump on the campaign trail said that if negotiations fall through, if they stall, we're going to double support the Ukraine. We're going to send more aid than Biden even. And so we're talking about commitments that have been bipartisan. And so to go back on those commitments is going to damage the credibility of the United States, is going to damage American credibility. It would be immoral to get reliant on your weapon systems and then deny them the ammunition necessary to support those systems. And it would ultimately be the wrong move. So I think that there is an obligation because we made promises, and promises are obligations on the world stage. And so that's why I think we should do it, as well as an obligation to our people to benefit their national security interests, which I think that this meets the standards of. So I think our promises to national security matter, and those create obligations.
All right. Thank you for that opening statement. And with that, we are going to hand the mic over to JS. And JS, whenever you're ready for your opening statement, I will start the timer up with your voice.
All right. Before I begin my opening, I want to take a moment to thank Dylan for doing this. I've known about you for around 4 years, from the Hippy Dippy podcast to watching all of your recurring appearances on the Hague Report, la, la, la. Although I completely disagree with your worldview in politics, I respect your journalism and willingness to pound the pavement and put in real work when most would prefer to sit behind a desk. That being said, I do see your work in Ukraine as one-sided narrative building, or biased at the very least, which is understandable because if you had been more fair to Russia, you likely would have frozen to death in a Ukrainian prison. Now for the debate, does the U.S. have an obligation to support Ukraine? The first thing I want to do is ask rhetorically, what is the U.S.? It's us. It's you. It's me. It's every American citizen. Do I have an obligation to support Ukraine when I can barely support myself? Perhaps you feel a personal obligation to help Ukraine due to bonds you've built and things you've experienced while visiting. But why does every American citizen have an obligation to support Ukraine when we have homeless people suffering in our own city streets? If that homeless person has a job and is saving to get an apartment, why is that homeless person obligated to support Ukraine through their taxes? Speaking of obligations, what obligation are we talking about? My opponent may say he only thinks we should give humanitarian aid, which according to CFR.org is the least of our contributions so far, at around $4 billion out of a total of $185 billion since February of 2022. But we can't simply ignore the more than $55 billion in financial aid or over $75 billion in military aid. I'm curious if my opponent believes this is a moral obligation, which you kind of touched on that in your opening. And if it is, why are we not just as obligated to support or aid the Russians who have suffered more casualties than the Ukrainians? There are sob stories and charity cases in every country all over the world. People are suffering everywhere. Does the U.S. have an obligation to support all of them? On a micro level, would a neighborhood with a community chest be obligated to spend the collected funds to help another neighborhood 5 states away? Am I obligated to pay the medical bills of my elderly next door neighbor? I need my opponent's specific meaning by obligation and answers to some of these hypotheticals to help me understand what someone is obligated to support or not to support. Now that my semantic disagreements and questions are out of the way, allow me to lay out my practical and economic objections to supporting Ukraine, seemingly indefinitely. America is currently $39 trillion in debt. Citizens are struggling to buy groceries and pay for gas. We can attribute this to Democrats or Republicans, but either way, the blame is irrelevant. Whether it's Trump or Biden who caused this doesn't matter. The point is we have an obligation to our own country and no obligation to people in another hemisphere who we can't afford to support. Economically, we can't afford to support or police the entire planet whilst people in our own house are suffering. If my opponent appeals to my Christian moral obligations to care for the widow and the orphan, to clothe and feed the poor, my question will be, is America a Christian country? This question could lead to a more important debate at a later date, but I would bet that my fellow interlocutor would disavow. I, as a Christian, have an obligation to love and care for my enemy, as well as the weak and the poor. But why do the American atheists share that obligation? This is not a debate about history or geopolitics. This is a debate about morality, right and wrong, and ability to help those in need. I may end up conceding many points to my opposition throughout this debate in an effort to get him to concede to a larger, more important question about meta-ethical quandaries regarding worldviews and governance over ourselves and our neighbors. I'll lay out some of these concessions shortly, but before I do that, I have one final argument for discontinuing support to Ukraine. Under President Donald J. Trump, support for Ukraine has reduced from $14 billion in 2024 to $400 million in 2026. If Ukraine is so dependent on us, you would think this lack of support would be causing a collapse in Ukraine's defenses and losses in its war with Russia. If you thought that, you would be wrong. Ukraine is currently one of the leaders in drone warfare, testing and utilizing the world's best and most cutting-edge drone and AI technology. Did they design and manufacture this equipment? Probably not. Maybe Dylan knows, but that's irrelevant. The point is that Ukraine is currently winning and edging closer to this war's end. Even Putin is talking about the war ending soon. Of course, his propaganda will proclaim his victory, but the fact that he is now calling President Zelensky by his name shows some sense of defeat. It seems to me that when we fund or otherwise support foreign countries' wars, the wars drag out. When we reduce our support and interaction, the wars end. I believe America is obligated to mind our own business, not to fund and support or even give thought to every foreign war in perpetuity, regardless of decisions made by weak men like Bill Clinton in 1994. Speaking of 94 Clinton, before ending this statement, I want to make a few concessions. I will concede that America has had influences on Russia and Ukraine, which could have potentially led to this war. The Bucharest Memorandum did commit us to support for Ukraine, but the term given was vague and indefinite. This was a bad deal that President Clinton committed us to 32 years ago. And in America, thankfully, we had the ability to leave a bad deal. So maybe we were obligated to support Ukraine at some points in history, but we are not obligated to help them now and forever. I will grant that Ukraine is awesome. Russia is evil. Putin is a madman, and all of this is his fault. But I will not concede that the lives of his people are worth any less than the Ukrainians, and I shouldn't be obligated to play white knight for either one of them. I can even grant that Trump has failed to end the war on day one of his presidency like he promised. Although Russia seems to be weakening with less and less territorial advancements over 2026, a rapidly deteriorating economy, and there are a lot of talks of the war coming to an end while Ukraine is receiving even less support. None of these concessions compel me to feel obligated to support Ukraine or any foreign nation's conflict. With that out of the way, I'm willing to learn from Dylan tonight because I know he's far more educated than me on this topic. But I do not anticipate that my mind will be changed that any or every tax-paying American citizen has any obligation to Ukraine. I look forward to a spirited debate, and I'll cede my time.
All right. Thank you for that opening statement. Great opening statements from both sides. We're going to move into the rebuttal round. So each debater will have 5 minutes uninterrupted to directly respond to their opponent's opening arguments. So this is not a back and forth yet, no interjections. And when your 5 minutes are up, we go to the other side, and then we're going to get into that open floor. So we're going to hand the mic back to Dylan. Dylan, whenever you're ready for your 5 minute uninterrupted rebuttal, I'll start the timer up with your voice.
Sure, I don't know if I'll use 5 minutes, but I'll try to use the majority of it. Number one, I'll just defend when it comes to the bias of my coverage. I have my perception. I have my goggles. I've seen what I've seen. I haven't been on the Russian side because I'm not given the opportunities to report on the Russian side, and I don't think they would let me. I don't have any problem with other people working on the Russian side to get the perspective if they do good reporting. Sadly, not a lot of good reporting comes out of conflict journalism on the Russian side of the army. There's been one, maybe two examples, but not very many. I would also put out that I've interviewed draft dodgers. I've interviewed prisoner soldiers. I've been an open Zelensky critic on corruption. I interviewed the 155 on the issue of abuses and mismanagement before the recent reports a year later. So I would say on some things, I wouldn't call myself like a whistleblower or something like that, but I was bringing attention to articles in English about issues that was largely talked about only in Ukraine. And I also play and read Russian state newspapers that are published just about every single news program. So I would say that I try to do my best to understand both the Russian perspective and also cover the both good and bad aspects of the Ukrainian society to the point where some brigades will not welcome me back, because I was too honest about some things. Never security issues, but because I am a journalist first and foremost. But besides that, I want to put out there that there's a personal obligation and there's a national obligation, right? Someone can make a promise on a personal level, right? I believe I'm, through promises I've made about like what I've said, like I'm going to be with this till the end, that I want to document as much as possible. I believe these war crimes should be documented. That's my personal commitment. National obligation, national commitment, and you talked a little bit this towards the end. I think America has a national commitment, a national obligation. The question was, does the U.S. have an obligation? And promises, like you said, the United States has made. So we agree that promises have been made. Those are obligations. If I go to Canada and say, I promise to give you $1 billion for all of this product, that's now an obligation I made. I made it to them. Now we can decide how much should we value this obligation, but it is an obligation. And we can say 1994 to give it some distance. When we're talking about the possession of world ending, or at least the world as we know it ending, because sometimes they can be exaggerated, weapons, the power to throw the sun at your enemies, to be blunt. 25 years is 25 years. Like most of those people who were alive when that decision was made are still alive today. That's not too far in the history. In the early 2010s, when this was reaffirmed and expanded, talk about Ukrainian membership in NATO, that was, we're talking 10 years ago. 2022 was not even 5 years ago. So we have re-upped these obligations in a way where the Ukrainians have become more and more dependent, not on us just for anti-nuclear weapons planning, not only for the aspects of the Budapest Memorandum, but in other aspects of their national defense. Like right now, 155 millimeter artillery guns are all across the front line. I've embedded with them. They were there during the Zaporizhia counteroffensive, and they've been there recently. If you don't give them the shells that we've invested in our Ukraine aid package to supply these guns, then the guns won't be able to fire. And that means that you've gotten a people obligated through your commitments on weapon systems that, pull the rug out under. You could say one thing about future weapon systems or another weapon, but for them to have the gun in their hand and you suddenly say, you know what, after 3 separate promises, after all these commitments, the United States has suddenly decided, separate from what President Trump said on the campaign trail, separate from what President Trump promised himself, that made some Ukrainians actually want him to win the election because he thought he could actually end it. My fixer, the main person who works with me in the country, he wanted Trump to win because he thought maybe that could mean an end and he could get back to his home. Obviously, a lot of people have changed their positions since then. So I do believe there's a national obligation, because promise is another word for obligation. Like when you make a promise, if you make a promise to the American people, you have an obligation to fulfill your promises, both morally and when it comes to trying to maintain American credibility generalistically. As for the debt will get worse if the war expands into wider parts of Europe. Our economy will get into a worse state if Europe really descends into wider economic chaos as our largest trading partner. American manufacturing has already taken enough hits, and it will mean us having to deal with the war later. Because ultimately, we will likely get dragged into a war in Europe, both due to our NATO promises, due to our commitments to other states, and the fact that, to be quite frank, it would be really bad if much of Europe was attacked in a wider war, or if Europe was hurt in a wider war. As for the question about whether or not we should send aid, or it will continue the war, or it will end the war, or why is the war continuing, we can talk about that in the open section.
All right. Thank you for that 5-minute rebuttal. And with that, we're going to hand the mic back over to JS. JS, whenever you're ready for your 5-minute uninterrupted rebuttal, I'll start the timer up with your voice.
So I'm glad you talked a lot about morality and the differences between personal and moral obligation, or in national obligations. But I would say if there is a national obligation from the U.S. to provide this support for Ukraine, who's paying for it? It's going to be the American citizens and the taxpayer. So you're looking at it from a broad perspective of, oh, well, the country did it, and this president who, his term came to an end, or we voted in many presidents since then. He made this agreement. He made this deal. Now every single individual person is obligated to support Ukraine. So that national versus personal differentiation, I don't see it as any different. I see I am the U.S. You are the U.S. And so we're the ones who are obligated to support Ukraine. As far as moral obligations, also, you talked about the drone technology. I know they got some crazy technology over there. We've been giving them amazing technology, and they're experimenting with it and using it over there. But it's a testing ground for death. It's like a battlefield of death. Lots of people are dying. I've heard you talk about how, this is one of the most important conflicts and the most deaths and all that. So by giving them more support and more technology, and it seems like you do support military aid. I want to get into that. Is it more just humanitarian aid? What are the percentages here of how we're supporting them? But you're talking about the shells. We're basically funding a testing field to kill people, and I don't think that's moral. As far as the reporting and the journalism, I'm glad that you're doing your best to be fair, but I think this is, in a big sense, a war of propaganda. Propaganda is going to continue to fuel the war, especially this fear mongering that Russia's going to take over the world if we just let them, if we back out of Ukraine. Russia's going to start taking over Europe, and it's going to destroy the whole world's economy and all this stuff. We have problems in Iran right now that are causing global economic disasters. And so I don't think that propaganda and fear mongering is helpful. And you say you do your best to report fairly. You can be critical of Zelensky, but why are journalists being killed so much? Why, what's his name? The Coach Red Pill. Yeah. The Coach Red Pill guy that died in a jail over there. Ukraine says he died from pneumonia, but there's, I guess, correspondence with his father and people in Russia saying that he was killed in a Ukrainian prison. There's so much fog of war around this that it's hard to know what's true and what's false. And sure, you can be critical of Zelensky, but can you be supportive of Russia? Probably not. And maybe you shouldn't. I mean, I'm not saying you should try and go out and try to be supportive of Russia or something, but Russian people are dying too. They've suffered more casualties. And about your friend who he wanted Trump to win to see an end of the war come. I hope the same thing, but Trump's term's not over. And from everything I'm looking at, it seems like the war is coming towards an end. Like Putin is starting to address Zelensky as Zelensky. He's showing more respect to him. He never used to do that before. He's saying he's already won. If Trump can bring about an end to this war, and in the lead up to that, he's lessening our support for them, it seems like that would be the right move. I think we would both rather have peace than just have this war drag out indefinitely. And so I don't know. I kind of just want to get into it. You're definitely the expert on this. I'm not a super history buff, war buff guy. I'm more just trying to see why I, as an American citizen, should be obligated to support this. And maybe you can convince me by the end of this, but I don't think you can.
All right. Thank you for that rebuttal. Great rebuttals from both sides. Before we move into the open hour of back and forth, I just want to talk to the audience real quick. If you're watching right now, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and subscribe to tonight's debaters, okay? Their links are in the description. And over here, we host all kinds of debates on Swords of Reasons, politics, culture, ethics, internet topics, video games, anything where reasoning and passion can collide. So if you enjoy the format, make sure you stay locked in because we have a lot more coming. And also a reminder for everyone in the live chat right now, after closing statements, we're going to be doing a 30-minute Q&A. So the question form is there in the chat, but remember, Super Chats, PayPals, Cash Apps, and Rumble Rants, they will get priority. So if they fill up the whole 30 minutes, we may not get to those free questions. So if you have something you want really guaranteed to be asked, send it through one of those options. We'll make sure it gets asked. And finally, thank you to both of our debaters for being here tonight and bringing your perspectives into the arena. Whenever one of you is ready to start the open floor exchange, I will you can go ahead and jump in, and I'll start the timer up with your voice.
Cool.
Sure. Should I just respond to one of the counters? Is that a good launching pad?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. One of the things you said was when we cut the aid, war ends. That tends to be the general cycle that repeats, is that America gets less involved, and then promptly afterwards, the wars that America is involved in end shortly afterwards. I don't know if you were thinking about Afghanistan in reference to that, or what other conflict, maybe Vietnam, or what other wars you were thinking about in specifics here. But I would say that Trump is an example of that not being the case, where he promised, 24 hours. Now, I don't know how seriously you took the 24 hours promise. A lot of people did take that seriously, that what the president of the United States says is a real promise. And he also said that afterwards, if the Russians hadn't made peace, he would increase the Ukraine aid. Like, if they didn't agree to just, accept it where it is, ceasefire line along the current line, if it was the Ukrainians that wouldn't accept that, then he'd cut off everything and force the Ukrainians to do a deal. If the Russians didn't accept that, then he would double aid to Ukraine, and he would really spook them. And that didn't end up happening. And instead, what we got is basically no support from the Trump administration. And any support that did get through was because Congress forced it through. The $40 million was an example of that. The money that he still has appropriated, he still hasn't sent over. And so through that time period, the war has expanded. I mean, the casualties on the front line last time I was there, it's still as bad as it's ever been. And I heard the bombing last night. It's as bad as it's ever been. We're seeing record-setting drone attacks. We're seeing record-setting missile attacks. We're seeing the Russians continuing to push forward to try to take the entirety of the Donbass, which talking about displacing about 150,000 people. And there's always the possibility that they could expand the war to Kharkiv, Zaporizhia. I mean, they already have troops in that direction in Volchansk. So when we say, well, it looks like the war is winding down, what we mean is we've seen some headlines about some people thinking about negotiating or some general posturing. But when it comes to the functions of on the ground in Ukraine, the war has only expanded. When you read the Russian state headlines, the paper that I read for today, where you're talking about Pravda or any of these big Russian state-run outlets, they're saying the war could go on for years longer. They're openly saying that. If you want to get the Russians to the table, the reality on the ground has to change. The equation has to change. It has to be that they can't keep advancing. Then they will stop the war, because then it's just a dead end that could only mean more damage for Putin, his cronies, and those in the political power structure in Russia, as well as Russia as a nation state. So I think that that's the really only way America can effectuate a faster end to the war, and Trump's strategy has actually dragged it out.
So is it not true that Russia has been losing territory over 2026?
That's mostly Ukrainian propaganda, to be completely honest with you. So on the Ukrainian Zaporizhia front, there's been one town retaken. Now, I don't know, that's cool, and those soldiers are brave when you see the type of missions you got to do to take that little piece of territory. It's incredible. But that is not what I would call a mechanized, amazing war-ending counteroffensive. When you talk about Hule-Pole and the counteroffensive that occurred on that direction, most of those recapturings have been reversed. And now I think what is a better description of what has happened is the Ukrainians in some areas have taken back some land, but the Russians are still broadly advancing. A lot of times the Russians release such ridiculous reports for capturing that once those reports are not true, they say, oh, the Ukrainians captured that back. No, it's just that the Russians never had it to begin with, and then it was marked gray by all these Osset war mappers, and now it's being said, hey, look, the Ukrainians recaptured. No, the Ukrainians didn't recapture it. You just didn't know what you were doing. You didn't have sources, and you lied. And
but
so
doesn't that speak to my point?
The best description would be that the Russian advance has slowed. That is a real thing that has happened. That does show that they're not advancing at as high of a pace. That's what makes some of these statements possible in the first place. But there's not like the Ukrainians are slowly crawling back massive pieces of territory. The Russian war machine is creaking and it's screeching as it bends to forward, but it is not screaming as it's pushed back.
Okay, and we've supported Ukraine with however many $75 million in military aid. They have some of the best technology. They seem to be doing well. Like everything you just said kind of speaks to my point that Russia has not advanced as much as we thought they did. And now, as of late, they're losing some of those, whether they be fake or real advancements. I heard that it's in some parts of no man's land, Russia will just send some soldiers out to stand out there. And that means they technically claimed the land.
Infiltration tactics, yeah.
Yeah, so that speaks to my point that Russia hasn't been doing as well as, like you've said this from the beginning, when all of us were wrong, when I was saying Russia's going to crush Ukraine in 3 days, it's going to be over. You were saying way back then in some of your old debates, you were saying Ukraine's winning. Ukraine's doing good in this. And Russia suffered more casualties. So, and Russia's not getting all that funding from the EU, from NATO, from America, the billions and billions of dollars in weapons, tech, information funding. They're not getting all of that.
EU aid has increased slightly, so they are getting still support from the European Union. The United States is what has been cut.
Okay, and so and they're doing okay. It seems like they're doing all right. Why? Because of this agreement 32 years ago, and I heard you kind of responded. You said there's been more.
Three agreements.
Budapest. There's been different agreements
4 years ago. Like that's pretty recent obligation.
So should it ever end, or should it just we're going to support Ukraine forever?
I can get to that second, but you can ask me. I forget questions sometimes,
okay.
So just ask me at the end of what I'm saying here. But when it comes to this idea of they're doing good enough without the support, right? Yeah, they've been able to slow down the Russian army, but the Russians started this war in a naively hopeful way. They sent 180,000 men to subjugate a nation of 44 million. And so what happened is their soldiers walked in to major cities and the windows started speaking AKM and AK-74, which is not a language that those soldiers preferred. And so that became a big issue at the start. And so what I said at the start was, John Mearsheimer is a schmuck. He was wrong. The war did happen. He's a bigger schmuck for saying that if it did happen, it would only last 2 weeks. And we should stop listening to these people as if they are the leading figures of knowing what's going to happen, and stop looking at IR as a field as if it's fortune telling and looking at these professors like they're fortune tellers, to be completely honest with you. But I said they were winning compared to Russia's objectives. Russia's objectives was, according to Putin's ideological statement at the time, was Russia cannot see Ukraine either exist as not part of the Russian world, as not as an extension of Russia, is how he phrased it in Russian, or it cannot exist at all, right? It either has to, as an entity, it must be part of the Russian world. It must be a Belarus-style state, or Ukraine as a national entity must be wiped off the face of the planet. This is the type of language he was saying before, and then he marched on Kiev. He got kicked out of Kiev. He then ran from Kiev, and then the objective became, well, let's unite Donbass. Let's take Kherson and Zaporizhia. Let's take what we can get. Seemed to be the short-term objective. Long-term, I still think he cares about all these things. I still think he wants all these things. But when it comes to those original objectives, yeah, the Ukrainians were winning because the Russians were obviously in retreat. But when it comes to these newer objectives, where I think because of the human safari in Kherson, it would be good if the Russians accepted they're not crossing the Dnieper River, right? It's a giant geographic barrier. It'd be very difficult for them to get their troops over. That's something they have to accept as physical reality, not just that it's morally wrong for them to hunt people and then say, welcome to the Russian Federation, which would be absolutely atrocious. Not because of even any moralistic, it's just like functionally it would be extremely difficult for them to pull off. But they're naively hopeful. This war was a naively hopeful project. Continuing this war going on 5 years is naively hopeful. There are certain leaders that are so taken up by their ideology and revanchist goals and what they think they can get away with that they'll always look at unlikely scenarios and go forward with that, right? There was a bunch of things that the idea that Ukraine would subjugate itself quickly was unlikely. The idea that the Russians, after failing, would continue to drag this war continuously on was unlikely. The idea that the Wagner crew there's a million different factors to this war that was unlikely when it comes to what the Russians continue to decide to do, but they keep making those decisions. And so just assuming, well, as it gets more difficult, they're not going to make decisions that makes the state more unstable, but allows them to continue the war. I'm not so confident in that, right? I've seen this war drag on and on and on day by day. So, maybe it's my perspective by feeling every day more intensely than other people. But, I think that the possibility of this war going into 2027 is real. And there's a Ukraine Act support package right now that could change the equation Putin sees in front of him that would actually bring the war to a quicker conclusion. I do think this is a scenario where we don't do less to get more. Sometimes you have to take some action if you want the equation to change.
I think continuing to support the war will keep it going into 2027. We're going to just continue funding the war machine, and more people are going to die over a longer period of time. Now, maybe the war is going to go on.
Why hasn't it cut it off? Why would 2027? Why is it going to end this year then? Because you're saying that it's.
I'm not saying it's going to end this year, but I'm saying
why this year.
I'm not saying it's going to end in 2027. You could be right. It could go on until 2035.
2026 because you don't want to see it. You don't want it to get. If we give them weapons, it'll continue into 2027. So what will not giving them weapons do that will fundamentally make it so that somebody has to make a concession or that the equation changes so that the war can end?
Well, I wasn't finished yet. It would lead to me not being the one obligated to fund the death. It would be Europe being obligated to fund the death. The EU, they have natural borders with these countries, so they should be the ones taking care of this. The EU should be, you said the EU has increased their funding package while the US has reduced theirs. I think that's a good thing. I think that US should be pulling out of this. We have oceans that separate us. We have our hemisphere. Let them worry about their hemisphere. And I'm sure Russia cares about its hemisphere too. It doesn't want beef with the US. I don't think we should be supporting or getting involved with either side. Europe should be the one handling this. This is their threat. What was the other thing? Well, we can go back to that later, but I wanted to talk about the 1994 deal. Those nukes, weren't those USSR nukes?
Well, yeah, but Ukraine was part of the USSR. The Soviet socialist. They were a Soviet state. They helped do most of the development, Ukrainian scientists.
But then the USSR collapsed and they come under new government. They want to be independent. Why should they retain those nukes?
Because they have them.
Just because they have them. Okay. Right on Russia's border. But that
like I don't know if you're like a person. I don't know how much personal property matters in your ideology. For me, it actually matters a significant enough amount.
I don't know
if a country develops the nukes and then holds the nukes, and if they were going to be an atomic war, Ukraine would be nuked because they have the nukes. So they hold all the risk, They did all the development, or at least a very large percentage, or at least the majority or plurality of the development, and they're the ones hosting it. So I think that like all of this could argue that they have very strong possession.
But it's like
claim over it. A
if
possession
I'm
claim they gave
working
up to Russia.
if I'm working in a company and the company comes under new management, we don't just get to keep all the leftover stock and supply from the old company owner, even though I helped build it because I worked at the company. I don't get
Was
to
Russia
keep
the
all
company owner of the Soviet Union?
No, the Soviet Union is the company owner here. The Ukrainians are the workers. And then Russia's the new company that comes in.
So why does the neighbors get it? Why in that decision?
I don't know
if you
why
say why do the Russians get it outside of the people who developed it, hosted it, and took all the risk for having it? I mean, like Ukraine was literally like its people were sickened by radiation due to Russian decisions about like atomic energy. Like Chernobyl was very like historically, I would say, significant to Ukrainians, and then they have to take all these atomic weapons after Soviet mismanagement, mostly from Moscow, right? They have to now give all those atomic weapons to them for nothing. Like it doesn't seem like a fair deal.
So they should have got to keep their nukes.
Well, it's either they get to keep their nukes, or Ukraine gets some sort of assurance.
I'm just making sure
they're going to give up the nukes for atomic security, because we're saying America's position was the less states that have atomic weapons, the better, because there's less points for failure, right? Mm-hmm. Which is something that I broadly agree with. Which is why I think Ukraine gave up some of its security for our security, and we said we would look after some parts of their security in return for that. And following that, they went into Iraq with us. They supported other American operations. Like their soldiers put themselves in harm's way in Iraq. They then listened to our commitments in the early 2000s and 2022. And you could say that there's a difference between personal and national commitment. And, Bill Clinton made this promise. It was Bill Clinton. It was other administrations. It was Joe Biden. It was Donald Trump.
Obama.
All these different bipartisan Obama, Republican, and Democrat administration failure, all around bipartisan failure, and to deliver on this, and it hurts American credibility. It is us violating an obligation. But the question is, do we have an obligation? We seem to both agree that there is an obligation. You just don't agree that it extends personally to you. America has an obligation, but we're in a republic. We voted for these governments. Are other people supposed to look at us and say, well, when we voted for these governments that all said the same thing until right now, even during the last election cycle, that wasn't us, the American people. That was the American elites or whatever other group like that. We live in a republic, and we have to take I'm not a populist to an extreme extent. To be completely honest, U.S. taxpayers are members of the republic. They pay taxes and they get the vote. They then vote for representatives that make decisions. All of our representatives made unified decisions for decades, and now we're talking about pulling the rug at the last second on the Ukrainians. So I think it is a little different.
It's not the last second. It's been a gradual drip of taking back our. Well, no, it's been pretty rapid under Trump.
In the middle of a war.
Okay, but we've sent them lots of weapons and lots of tech and lots of information. Is there ever some line where we're going to cross that, where we've made up for the nukes that we took from them? Like now they have technologies. They're doing good against Russia, better than anyone expected with the technology they had, plus the technology that we've given them. Is there ever a point where we've done enough? We should back out of this, because there is a personal obligation to the EU for the defense of their people. Like I said, they're on the border. They have an obligation for the safety of their people to defend their countries, but we don't have that same obligation. We could defend our own country, and Russia's not going to mess with us. We'd rather have a peaceful deal, a peaceful relationship with Russia to avoid conflict.
The relationship we developed with Europe when it comes to weapons is one of purposeful reliance, right? There's a certain level that we want the Europeans to be spent. For example, when they talk about weapons in Europe, they don't say, we want you to build these many artillery factories. We want you to build these many XYZ factories. What does Trump say every time? What did Obama say every time? Get to a certain percentage of spending. Get to this number. Obama said one number, Trump said a different number, but it's always a percentage number. It's never, we want you to build X amount of factories. If the question was about supporting Ukraine through defense economics, then the question would be, Europe, get rid of your barriers between your states, make your factories in the places where it's cheapest to make them, where the labor is the cheapest, where there's the least regulations, build as many factories there as possible, and support yourself. But what we wanted was for Europe to just take all that money and spend it on American defense articles. And the way we spent our aid was specifically targeted to make that ability possible, where we expanded the defense plants in Scranton, Pennsylvania. When Zelensky was visited the United States, that's the plant he went to because that produces the most 155 millimeter artillery shells. So it's one thing to say Europe generally needs to take the lead on this. It's one thing to say that they should do financial aid. We should do lend-lease even. It's one thing to go out there and say that eventually they need to take up the mantle on this. It's another thing to say, let's do decades and decades and decades of policy to make Europe reliant on American defense manufacturers. And then when they ask for resupply, we say, tough. Or when we say, are we going to continue to support the foundation of what we made with aid investments? We say, never mind. That seems like a totally different scenario to me. Like one that's not asking for the EU to take our place as a security guarantor, more than like try to scramble to create a plan.
Why should we be security guarantor? Why shouldn't it be a more reciprocal relationship? Like I remember Trump was trying to negotiate deals with Ukraine to get rare earth in exchange for some of these things we're doing. I'm okay with trade. I'm okay with doing deals.
A mineral deal. They signed a mineral deal. They have gotten more data on the Patriot air defense system from the war in Ukraine up until that next major war they needed all that data for, which was the war over the Suez, not over the Suez, over the Strait of Hormuz. I'm getting my economically important passageways mixed up.
Right.
They've given us extreme knowledge on drone tactics. They train with our soldiers and directly train them how to fight this type of future of warfare. And let me be honest, because of how America is in the world right now, how many operations we have on so many different parts of the globe, America having its soldiers directly dragged into a war is very possible. And if that does happen, I want there to be as few videos of American service members being hit by FPVs in the last living moments of terror as physically possible. And there's one country in our alliance system that can actually give us the ability to counter that, and that's the Ukrainians, because they're the only ones who have dealt with it at scale. I mean, I've seen their soldiers operate with these. Like the infantry to the anti-drone pilots to the drone pilots themselves, they've all had to learn to live after around 5 years in this environment. That is vital to the United States. And again, the agreements that Trump wanted, they negotiated to a point of solution, but that still didn't get Trump to fulfill his campaign promises.
Well, I'm fine with all of those reciprocal optional things that you just said, but all of those trade deals for weapons and technology and using them to study these new Patriot defenses and the drones, all of that is optional and beneficial. It's not an obligation, and it's reciprocal. And I believe that's the better option than obligating the American citizen, because that's another thing. I want to know, what specific types of aid are we talking about? Or are you saying all of the military?
I'm supportive of going further than the Biden administration when it comes to aid. I think that if we want to end the war quickly, we need to take strong action. And that is the best way to end the war quickly, that the war has grinded the Russian war machine to a point where if it faced a massive barrier like that, it would have to make aggressive decisions that would probably lead to the end of the war. I think that is the quickest way to end the war. I think it's the best way to preserve life. And I think it's a good way to stop the Russians from displacing millions more Ukrainians in cities like Dnipro, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, that if the Russians advance forward, will be threatened. And that would mean the most displaced people on the planet will become Ukrainians.
You said in the war
that should be avoided, that people don't think, oh, become an American ally, then you become the #1 displaced refugees in the world. What amazing thing to do with America to lose your people like that.
You said end the war and preserve life. To end the war, aren't they going to have to end a bunch of Russian lives?
Yeah.
Like yeah. So it's you can't like morally grandstand and say,
Have you ever heard of a controlled fire?
A controlled fire, a controlled burn,
in
like
firefighting. No, I'm not a firefighter.
You use fire to stop the fire.
But I know firefighters, and I know the ones that deal with really wild ones in like California, down in like where it doesn't get as bad.
Yeah, I know you use fire to stop the fire.
They
Sucks all the oxygen out.
Well, let me finish the controlled fires point. Part of what a controlled fire is essentially you light a fire to put out a fire. where there's a pathway where the fire is expanding. You light a fire so that it cannot hop over that area in order to catch more stuff with cinders and expand the fire into more homes. And so it seems counterproductive, the idea of starting a fire to end a fire. But when people talk about this war, they talk about fueling the fire. If somebody hits a wall, if you cannot achieve your military objectives on the battlefield, then you have to end the war. If the Russians face a major political objective that is in the face, war is politics. Klaus Schwab said that if they face that problem on the battlefield, they will have to engage differently politically. So yes, I do believe that politics is war is politics. So it's sadly, if you want negotiations to work, you have to change the equation on the ground. War is not a thing like there's a switch you flip where I turned off the war fuel, so the war is over now. Where if the invading party that initiated the war, that wants to continue the war and has never really shown any indication otherwise, is able to continue it while the defending party is getting undermined, that will encourage the invading party to continue. That's just kind of how negotiations work.
Yeah, I agree. But you can't obligate a citizen to support that. Like that there is going to be
a state, and citizens are members of the state. Citizens vote, and their constituencies form together to make Congress people. And this support was not just voted on in, when we talk about a lot of these agreements just by, presidents. There's also legislators got involved in a lot of these agreements, right? So I think that there is strong show both in the American polling, when you talk about the vast majority of Americans, and they support continued assistance to Ukraine, and it's increased since these failed negotiations, but also when it comes to America's previous commitments. Yes, taxpayers can have personal opinions and personal further obligations. I've taken on a certain personal obligation when it comes to this war. You can choose not to take on a personal obligation when it comes to this war. You don't have to come here. You don't need to donate anything. But when it comes to taxpayers and citizens are members of the state. The state makes promises, and America, not Urban Adventures, not Dylan Burns TV, not Speakeasy. America is the one with the obligation. The U.S., the state, we are members and parts of the state, but the U.S. has an obligation, not you personally outside of what our state does with the resources that we give it as a collective in a republic.
Yeah, again, I am the U.S. and I'm totally okay.
Well, you as many other Americans.
Yeah, I'm totally okay with charity and you and your personal obligations, that you feel that if you want to donate, you want to start a charity, whatever. Have you done that? Like, have you started fundraising campaigns and canvass? Because I know you've been active in like politics and things like that. You've canvassed for people. Have you raised funds for Ukraine?
I've fundraised for anti-mine equipment, in order to remove mines from civilian. You can find mines in people's literal backyards. There was 3 anti-tank mines in this old babushka's backyard, pedal mines, these dangerous little anti-personnel mines in high grass. A lot of area, mostly around Balaklia. I lived with these deminers for a month. Very, very rambunctious men, I could say. But yeah, I've done some fundraisers.
They walk around looking for mines all day.
My charity work. There's
no, I'm not trying to get personal with you, but my point is, I respect that. I respect you doing that, and everybody can do that. But you're talking about obligation at the tip of a gun from the government. If I don't support this, if I don't pay my taxes or something, I go to jail.
Yeah, that's taxes.
Yeah, that's taxes, and I'd rather have transparency and know what my tax money is going to, and not have it go to Ukraine.
Now,
so to perpetuate a war.
There's 2 discussions here, though. One discussion is America as a state. If a government's representatives, through multiple administrations, bipartisan, make promises, and both from the congressional level, Senate level, and presidential level, right, throughout decades and decades and decades, and get you reliant on these promises, then there is a certain obligation of the state. But you're talking about, and the question was, again, U.S. have an obligation, not Urban Adventures, the taxpayer, have an obligation, but the United States as an entity. The second question is a philosophical question of, do we believe that taxation is moral when it comes to, I assume, certain issues? Because I think you probably believe in roads. You probably believe in I don't know if you believe in public schools, but I'm sure there's a certain area where you're this is okay to tax for at the point of a gun. If I said Screw roads. I live in the woods like a hillbilly. I don't want to pay for roads. Somebody would come and they would say, Dylan, you have to pay for roads or you're going to, that's how it works.
Yeah.
That's the power of the state. And so I agree that is a philosophical conversation that we can have personally, but the country made that decision. It made that decision 3 times on the international stage. It made that decision when it comes to the legislature. It made this decision when it comes to the constitutionality of it. It's not like the Supreme Court ever came in and said, that's illegal and unconstitutional because it's not nice how taxation works. Again, I'm not a populist. America. This is about the United States. You as an individual taxpayer, you can believe whatever you want and you can vote however you want, right? And I hope people use Track Ukraine to track people's legislative record on Ukraine when they make their votes, pro or against. But at the end of the day, like we're talking about America's commitment, and you're a taxpayer, you're part of America. That's just that's how republics work.
It is the case that yeah, currently some of my tax money is going to go to Ukraine at the tip of gun. I'm not arguing what is, I'm arguing what should be. And I'm saying we ought not have that obligation.
Is that a separate question than if the U.S. have an obligation of what should be? Because if you're saying that America should do no foreign aid, okay, that's an ideological question, but the question was about obligation. If we want to, so there's 30 minutes left. If we want to take the last half talking about, what should be and the morality of like taxing for something like this, and we can have a deeper philosophical conversation, that's one thing. But the previous prompt that I was working off of is whether our country has an obligation, which I thought was the easiest question to answer because we've made so many promises over so many decades, and a country has taken that obligation to heart to the point where, like, I've gotten like very friendly receptions in this country because I'm an American, and I mean the people like ask about those promises, but they believed in them. So I think when it comes to obligation, that's clear.
There were complaints about that Bucharest memorandum that it was open-ended, it was vague. There were complaints.
Do you believe in those complaints?
Well, I believe that there could have been an agreement that was made, but it wasn't a well-written agreement. We shouldn't have signed up to that agreement. So how long are we going to?
Well written about it? Do you disagree with it, or was it written vaguely? Because
it was open-ended. It just
open-ended in what manner?
Like it obligates us in perpetuity.
Well, that's when it comes to length, that is open-ended, yes. But I don't remember, like, the idea was that it would protect Ukraine's sovereignty for quite a while, and Ukraine's sovereignty was infringed.
How long is quite a while?
So we're talking about 20 years, right? We're talking about literally 20 years from its
it was 1994 was 32 years ago.
Acted upon. So I don't believe that it was so vague, from my reading of it at least, that it said, like, generally speaking, eventually this will be over. There was no, like, it was open-ended about its length because it was supposed to be long-lasting to the point there was peace in Europe. It wouldn't be necessary, was the idea, because there'd be structures that would prevent another war like this. Obviously,
and there's never going to be peace all over Europe. Like, that's not going to happen. You said 20 years. It was 32 years ago.
Peaceful era Europe has ever lived in, funnily enough.
Right now is the most peaceful era?
Even with the large-scale war, post-World War II, post-Soviet collapse, Europe has generally become a much more peaceful place, and that is in part because of these structures. That doesn't make these structures infallible. All men are fallible. All structures are fallible because structures are made up by men. But at the end of the day, like, yeah, I do think that Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are not at war because they're in NATO, and structures like this, if acted upon in 2014, probably could have prevented a wider war. But Obama failed. It was a bipartisan failure through Trump, through Biden, through Bill Clinton, through Obama. They can say which ones failed less than the others, but it was bipartisan.
Yeah, it was both sides causing this problem. Sure, I can grant you that. And
so what about
now every time Russia attacks,
an obligation, that's a settled question. The question now is whether it should have that obligation. Not if it does, but if it should. I think that these are two different questions.
Well, it doesn't, because Trump could pull out of that whenever he wanted.
Well, then do we have an obligation to any agreement we've ever made ever? Does Trump have an obligation to our rights? Does Trump have an obligation to anything?
Yeah, we don't have an obligation to any of this stuff.
I believe Trump has an obligation to uphold the Second Amendment. Do you believe that?
Yes.
Yes, I believe that the bump stock ban was unconstitutional. I believe that there's certain things the president cannot do through just executive action without shall not be infringed is the text. Okay. Now shall not be infringed really meant this, really meant that, really meant that, whatever. That's like the constitutional like line of it, because that's the agreement we made, the contract between the people, you, me as taxpayers, and the government 250 years ago, right? That's the only thing. Like, I don't know where your parents are from, or your grandparents or great grandparents are from. Mine goes back to German, Scott, Irish, like back in that way. I don't know if you're British or whatever your lineage is. The
I don't
only
know.
thing that ties all of us together is that obligation that our government has, that we have an agreed upon idea that certain Americans have inalienable rights, that those rights should be upheld, that we all live in a republic, that our political differences is to be solved at the ballot box, not by like thugging around your neighbors. People have a right to their own property. People have a right to, a right to bear arms. People have certain
all
rights,
those rights and
freedom of speech,
things.
freedom of religion. These are all obligations because these are agreements between us as individuals and the state. But as members of the state, as taxpayers, we also get elected representatives in a republic who then make international obligations. Now, in every reading of the Constitution I have seen, they talk about Congress's and the Senate's responsibility to foreign policy and the president's responsibility to foreign policy. And whether you want to talk about a congressional level, whether you want to talk about a presidential level, these organizations have the ability to engage in foreign policy and make agreements and make national U.S., as the question said, obligations to say we're going to sign this treaty called the Geneva Convention, or we're not going to sign this treaty. This treaty that says we will oblige by these rules, this treaty says we do not. We're taking the obligation that we're not going to execute prisoners of war. We're taking the obligation that we don't just go around and like execute civilians wantonly, right? So these are obligations. Treaties are also obligations. Agreements, assurances, these are all different type of obligations. And we made this obligation 3 times over bipartisan administrations and on the campaign trail of the current president of the United States. So I would say, to me, it's very simple that the question isn't whether there is an obligation due to what our state said and what other countries built their security upon, but it's a question of whether we should right now. Whether what you say about, hey, if we just stop supporting Ukraine, the war will end quicker, or that is this really in the interest of the taxpayer? Like that, I think, is the more interesting question. I think the first question, honestly, settled.
Well, what you're saying when I say Trump has an obligation to support the Second Amendment, that's because he's agreeing to that. The same force that makes us obligated to stand up to the agreements that we've made in the past is the same force that could change those obligations at the drop of a hat. The same gun that's telling me you need to pay taxes to support Ukraine, that gun could be used against the Second Amendment. They could change those rights, that they could come in and make those different obligations. So are you saying that we're obligated to whatever the biggest power says we're obligated to do?
I think that is part of the reason why NATO exists, is because nobody wants the nation states to be dictated in that way, where the Russians can just roll in and say Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or Ukraine, or the United States, if targeted outside of our reach, we can expect ourselves to be alone on our own, sending only our boys to die in some cave somewhere against some terrorist organization. The Danes, who got into a really big scuffle with the current administration, they had the highest deaths per capita of any participant in the war on terror in Afghanistan, of any participant. Like, so, I mean, these are countries that gave up significant, security, they gave lives for the United States. And that was due to America's commitments that said, look, we would be committed to you if you'd be committed to us in these circumstances. And we sometimes have flaked commitments, like in the Falklands crisis, where we said, we're not going to support Great Britain in the war, defensive war against Argentina. Why? Because it's not in North America and Europe. Because it's not North America and Europe, we don't have to do it. Who said that? Ronald Reagan. It was Ronald Reagan who said that. You know what is in Europe? Ukraine is in Europe. So
Yeah,
I mean, even if you want to go all the way back to Reagan, even if you want to go all the way back to Reagan, we've been making these types of commitments and obligations and be making these statements that could ultimately stretch over to Ukraine in the future and what a state could say. So again, if we want to talk about the morality of taxation and like more libertarian belief systems, we can do that. I go to LibertyCon every once in a while, right? I can have that conversation. But I think the United States is a state, and we are members of the state. We vote for representatives of the state, and we make agreements. right? Agreements that millions of Americans have died protecting when it comes to, wars and alliances we've entered. So yes, I do believe that our alliance systems, our assurances, our promises, and our obligations matter.
Okay, and I don't believe that just because the guy with the biggest gun made a promise that obligates me to do something because I happen to live in this country. Maybe I am sounding like a libertarian. I'm not a libertarian. I don't believe all taxation is theft, and we should pay some taxes.
Do you
But
believe
even
in
then,
republicanism?
I don't know. I'm a little more extreme. Republicanism is cool. I'm more of like a theocracy guy.
But are we in a republic?
We are in a constitutional republic, yeah.
And in that constitutional republic, the people we vote for are the ones who make decisions about these types of foreign policy issues and ultimately decide the U.S.'s, America's obligations. No?
Yeah.
So when it comes to America having obligations, they've chosen these obligations, made these obligations.
But
so
we voted in new people.
Whether or not you believe we should.
We voted in Trump on mandate that he would end the war with Ukraine. So,
but on the mandate, on the speeches that I listened to, and I listened to a lot of Trump speeches, he would say he would end the war in 24 hours, and then he'd give the strategy of how he would do it, which right now, obviously didn't pan out, but, I'm still hoping, I'm still praying. I'd like to wake up to good news.
But that's what I voted for, and that's what Trump promised.
He would the ceasefire along current lines, or if the Russians didn't accept it, he'd surge aid. He didn't deliver upon his campaign promise either, which is a type of personal obligation outside of a national obligation.
But so if I voted for, and if all the people who voted for Trump voted for him because they were obligating their leadership, their power, their force, whatever you want to call it, we were obligating him to end this war. We want to be out of this war. Then how are we as a people obligated now to continue supporting them in perpetuity?
Because that's the only way you're going to end the war in the fastest speed possible. Trump's strategy is what has allowed this war to continue to drag out. I mean, look,
but the mandate is obligating America to end the war.
Has led to increases in Russian energy profit that will allow them to continue. And getting rid of the sanctions exemptions, trying to remove these pressures from Russia, has allowed them more money inflow into the war. More money makes more. With money, you can make war. And Trump has set the conditions that the Russians can carry out the war financially longer than they could have otherwise due to Ukraine's long-range sanction campaign, as Zelensky puts it. If the United States was to give Ukraine the ability and the supply to be able to hit the factories that manufacture the bombs to carry out the war, it would end the war quicker than if we were to wait for the Russians to just spend all the money that they could gather and the Ukrainians to kill as many Russians as possible. But if you want to do it that way too, I would prefer it. I think most people prefer it not. But yeah, the Russians cannot recruit forever. They fought the war in Afghanistan with all of the Soviet Union for 9 years. They can't continue that forever in Ukraine, but we want to shorten it, not extend it. And so I think to shorten it, you give the Russian political leadership a difficult, immediate decision.
And the Russian, is it true that the Russians are not able to recruit people as fast as they're losing them currently, and that their economy has dried up, I think, from 4% expansion every year to 1% or less than 1%. Their economy is dying and they can't recruit enough soldiers.
There's a very good chance for recession in Russia. As for military recruitment, that might be true. It might be just the Ukrainians talking, but it's probably at the very least they're recruiting just as much as they're losing. So their ability to expand the war when it comes to manpower without new decisions like mobilization will make it difficult. But that doesn't mean that they won't necessarily either make those decisions or that they won't try to recruit anyway, regardless, and carry it out longer and think that they can use other strategies like the longer range attacks on Ukraine in order to submit them. Most people didn't think the war was going to start in the first place. Thinking that the Russians were now going to think rationally about their national survival is, I think, a fool's errand. And I would just put forward that one way to make it so even if they don't think rationally that they have to decide the war's over is make it so that there's no possible pathway for the war to continue on positive terms for the Russians.
And you think so more support, more funding. I thought you were going to be coming in more with humanitarian arguments. I didn't know that you supported sending them more weaponry. So you want financial aid.
The Russians deserve what they've brought upon themselves.
Okay, and you think the best way to end it would be more support rapidly and what, like a giant attack on Russia and just end it
More
in
like
one
just, I think supporting the Support Ukraine Act, which is currently up for a vote. It's
soldiers?
going to be up for vote soon because of the discharge petition. And then a larger aid package after the next House session is the type of thing that could end the war. I think that they would look at that and they would think about the idea, because the promise to the Russian public was America will eventually stop caring, the West will be divided, and we will be able to take the Ukrainians back into the Russian world. Now, with Trump's election and America's cutoff of aid, this has fulfilled part of the picture. Not the full picture, but part of it. If the United States was to resume aid, this type of mental image being sent to the Russian public, who now cannot guarantee that the Ukrainians will subjugate themselves this year or the next, and will see no short-term end to the idea of them being able to take Kherson, Zaporizhia, or even the rest of the Donbass, I think that would precipitate an end to the war more likely than us sitting and doing nothing, which has so
Are you
far failed.
are you using Starlink right now?
No.
Are you a fan of Starlink and what Elon did with Starlink?
Sometimes I think that it's very helpful right now.
Yeah. See, I think that's a better example of ways that people could support Ukraine without it obligating the American citizen. Things like that.
But that was also paid for by U.S. taxpayer dollars in a lot of instances. So, I mean, that does kind of obligate U.S. taxpayers. And we're also talking about Star Shield, which is, we're talking about like military equivalents of Starlink. And like, so, I mean, yeah, I guess we could have gotten other countries to sponsor it. But that's still American assistance. That's still American support.
But
that's
not obligated. Now you say a portion of our
well, it's obligated by contract right now. So I mean,
if a portion of our taxes goes to no, I'm saying the American citizen's not obligated to that was charity from Elon.
If we it charity for like a little bit, and then most of it was taxpayers from Poland and the United States.
Okay. So
like that's the thing. You announce it as a big charity package, and then later, once everybody stopped paying attention, then you let like the bureaucrats and everybody else foot the bill. I mean,
and then I would say maybe we shouldn't be paying taxes for Starlink, but I am okay with paying taxes for Starlink because that's also in the interest of our national defenses. Is
it not in the interest of our national defenses to expand artillery shell for 155 millimeter artillery shells at plants like Scranton, which aid to Ukraine has allowed them to do? I mean, most of our aid to Ukraine, number one, it's either old gear, and I mean, I've seen gear that my grandfather used in Nam on the front line here. So we're talking about gear that we probably would have detonated and destroyed anyway. When he talks about troop transport, stuff like that, stuff the Ukrainians really want more of. And the other thing is American weapons deals. So that means stuff made in American factories, employing American citizens, and then packages including in their total amounts the replacement for said weapons. So weapons that sit in American storage being included as Ukraine aid. And when these numbers are counted, they use the original manufacturing price. They don't use the price at sale. So if something was made 50 years ago and is obviously not worth what it was 50 years ago, they still treat it like what it was worth 50 years ago. So, like, I think that the American taxpayer, honestly, hasn't sent as much to Ukraine as most taxpayers think. And the majority of American taxpayers support expanded support for Ukraine, not just continued support for Ukraine, but after the failed negotiations, the American public, the taxpayer, have changed their opinions.
Yeah, it blew my mind. I thought I was on the popular side of this debate, but
check out the Gallup polling. Anybody in chat who wants to see it.
I was saying, what is it, like more than 55% of Americans?
We're talking like 65 to 70% of Americans. We're talking, it's like sizable amounts.
Yeah. So it's popular, which
and been voted on and elected through Trump, Biden, like so many different presidents. Like, I mean, so it's like these are all obligations in different ways. The public feels obligated morally when you look at polling, obligations from our government officials, obligations from the promises our country has made, obligations from our legislature, it perfectly being constitutional. The Supreme Court has never struck any of it down. Like whatever interpretation you want of a foreign policy agenda in the age of the AOMF, whether you look at Congress or the presidency as the premier, decider of these issues, both offices have made these decisions, have made these commitments, have agreed to these obligations. So to me, Like the obligations are set, and America's credibility will be irreversibly damaged for our lifetimes if the image that people come out of this is America makes a bunch of promises, goes back on those promises after they've disarmed you of nuclear weapons. What should everybody do? Get nuclear weapons. What should everybody do? Not listen to America's promises. What should everybody do? Not take America at its word and think that Americans act like snakes. And I mean, that's already a reputation that America is slowly building in Ukraine through this continue. I mean, when I was walking back from Druskivka, I could see like paintings for like Donald Trump, like, look here, see what's happening to a lot of the activities. So there is already this feeling of betrayal, both in Ukraine and also on the wider stage, that doesn't benefit the United States, to the point where right now China has a better polling than America. That's a new development. This is a Trump second term development.
Better
The Chinese
polling.
are starting to poll like general public opinion of the Chinese in certain polls are either neck and neck or in reliable polls even exceeded the United States. Now, I'm not going to say that this is exclusively because of this, but people look at America, even those who support Russia, look at America as a betrayer of Ukraine. That, of course, this was going to happen eventually from the Russian side and from those who support Ukraine, which is the majority of the world community. They see America as the only one who has the artillery production to support Ukrainian artillery on the front, as one who's pulling the rug on them. And regardless of whether or not you think we should have made an obligation, the Ukrainians were relying on that obligation, and the world sees it.
But the mandate we sent was for an end to the war. And as far as popularity and the polling of China versus America about how happy people are with their country, I don't know that means much. I believe that this has been a war of propaganda from the very beginning. There's been propaganda from both sides, fear-mongering us that we need to stay in this forever. And that could be evidence of why there's such popularity for this, why there's such high public opinion about support for Ukraine, because we get a lot of one-sided journalism. I can't even watch tenant media or Russian Times or stuff like that on YouTube without that content getting struck and I have to take it down off my channel. So all we see mainly is one side from Ukraine, and I hear Ukraine's winning the war. And so of course there's going to be popularity for it on the American side, because that's what we're shown and that's what we're told to believe.
What is one journalist doing work in Ukraine that you think is like doing like good work on the mainstream news, or like is not even doing good work?
I don't know any of them.
Does anybody know the names of these people? Are these people that get highly featured in their reporting? I know the names, but it doesn't matter that I know the names. Does the people know these people? Because Walter Cronkite, his name was known during Nam. People gave a fuck. It was Walter Cronkite, for God damn it. When he talked, the country listened. Where's the Ukrainian Walter Cronkite for the United States? I'm in the trenches. I'm in there. CNN. No, I'm not that. It would be really nice. It's a very nice compliment. I'd prefer Edward R. Murrow maybe, but at the end of the day, like, Ukraine doesn't get the coverage I think a lot of people believe it gets. I mean, like right now, the big talk about Ukraine is Candace Owens is in Moscow talking about how Christian Russia is, that Tate brothers are getting like state honors. Every time the president of the United States talks of Putin, he talks of him in a relatively friendly manner. The U.S. Embassy doesn't condemn major war crimes by the Russians anymore. Like, they don't even do like a Bucha anniversary post anymore. It's just like not something they seem to care about, because they've removed themselves as a backer of Ukraine into a mediator role that has not brought the war to a conclusion. And like, I gotta tell you, man, it is difficult for on-the-ground reporters to really get on these networks to talk about what they're seeing. Most Americans don't know what the human safari is, and that is the most notorious Russian war crime ongoing in Ukraine right now. So when people say, "Oh, all this propaganda," I wish I saw it. I wish I saw it. If you look at the API metrics, we're talking about a 98 to 99% decrease in coverage since the start of the Russian invasion, and how much social media interaction, how much coverage it's getting. And it's not like we can say, oh, social
That's
media
short attention spans.
For Ukraine. Is Elon throttling it for Ukraine? The guy who said giving Crimea to Ukraine was a mistake, who cut off Starlink during the Crimean boat attacks that the Ukrainians were trying to pull off some like mega crazy operation, and he cut it off. And like, so who waited so long to stop the Russians from being able to continue to use Starlink and his military attacks until it became too PR unfriendly. So it's like, for me, I don't think that it's so simple. I think it's as basic as Americans saw Trump say we're going to end the war in 24 hours. He failed. He failed drastically. They see what he's doing. It's not working. And so they want to try something else. Supporting Ukraine with military aid was popular before Trump. Then as Trump got in there, it started to kind of, go, is it only 53, 54%? And then it went up again because it failed. So he could say, oh, the propaganda did it. The fact that the war is still going, the fact that the war is failed, I think that's what's done it. I don't think it's propaganda on the TV. There's more Russian propaganda going on now than there was at the start of the war. They really kicked in the high gear in comparison to the start of the war when they were kind of flustered because they thought the war was going to be quick and then they'd have to do after control. And instead, people were hearing about Bucha and there was this weird NAFO thing. And why are these stupid dogs in my reply as annoying as all possible? Why X, Y, Z? And so I think that really I just disagree about the state of the information space.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the lack in reporting and stuff, you could just attribute that to short attention spans of people on the internet. We saw when this started, everybody on my street had a freaking Ukrainian flag on their front porch. That it was pumped into people. Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. YouTube channels were being banned and Facebook's. What was that?
Do they have those flags still?
No, because they moved on to a Palestinian flag the next week, and then a gay flag the week after that, and a different black square flag.
Of it no longer being the flavor of the week. In fact, it's increased when it's no longer the flavor of the week. What does that say?
I don't know. That blew my mind. I was not expecting that because like all these people, I haven't even been super focused on Russia. I'll do a little update on the Russia-Ukraine war every now and then, but I had to go back and look at all this stuff and refresh my memory because I haven't been focused on it. What is this thing that I've never heard of? The thing you said most Americans don't even know about, the worst war crime. What is it?
Human safari. It's the
human safari. And what is that? I don't know about that.
So essentially, Russian drone pilots have been releasing footage on public. I mean, when I was in here,
they're like hunting people with drones.
They do it with drones or artillery. In my case, it was artillery. In the case of a lot of other people, it was drones. Where they target civilians, ambulance drivers, firefighters, city workers, people walking on the street, and military targets. And they just target anything that essentially moves in Kherson with drones. And not to mention that their artillery targeting with of the city is like absolutely atrocious. They'll say our evacuation order is the city. Good luck, and then they just fire absolutely. And I'm not exaggerating. You can go check it out online if you want to sift through the Telegram groups. And the worst part is that they take footage of all of this, and this is what makes it so undeniable: is they released the footage. They posted online. I thought I was gonna have to spend like so long like proving that the Russians did this, but they posted their video of them bombing us during these aid operations to save people who were drowning in their homes after a dam exploded. And they put rock music of it. The lyrics were like, and the gods of war. And then the bomb explodes, hits John Jones, the aid worker, in the stomach, this elderly British expat who used to do policing in the Bahamas. Really nice dude. Thankfully, he survived, but a lot of other people didn't. And I've seen elderly grandmothers morning stroll get splattered in Kherson because of the human hunters. I think they're honestly probably some of Russia's worst war criminals. And it's not surprising to me that a lot of the people who are engaged in this, like the private military company of the Crimean occupation, that dude is like an actual mafia guy. He was a mafia hitman. Like a lot of the people who worked with the Russian occupation when they took over were criminal elements because they were the most willing to immediately work for profit when a lot of other people didn't want to rat on their neighbors.
Okay, but another about the popularity of this and the polling and stuff right now. Weren't you? I was watching your stream right before this began, and you were showing Russian people who are going on Russian TikToks and stuff, and you said they're contributing to the Russian war machine, and they just got canceled, and you were kind of laughing about it. So is there not? There's still stifling of reporting of people who are talking from Russia.
Those people were banned not because of reporting. Those people were banned because they were trying to recruit teenagers to help Russian defense companies make drones. Like those people were banned specifically because they wanted to work for Alibuga Polytech, which is like a massive Russian drone. Like if you see the big drone smashing into Ukrainian cities, those are what they do. And TikTok said we don't believe that 16-year-olds should be working in drone companies that could be bombed. And so on Twitch, they got a 3-day ban, though. So I say the wrong word, you can get banned forever. Help bomb Ukrainian children, 3 days. Thank you, Dan Clancy. I love you.
Okay. But both sides have been killing press. Like I saw in one of your videos, you said you had to take your press badge off. But both sides are killing press and journalism. There's language blocks in the Ukraine.
What press is the Gonzalo Lira like the only example, or is there? If there's another example, I'd like to know it because that matters a lot to me. I've dealt with what censorship looks like in Ukraine, and I can talk about it. But like killing of the press is not a occurrence really. Or at least
Ukraine's not doing that.
If it does happen, it's not widely known.
Well, you would be the authority on it. So is he the only example?
He's the only talked about example because he's the only thing people can like say might have been the Ukrainian state killing a journalist, but he's not a journalist. He was a pickup artist who mostly just ranted for the Russians in his apartment. I mean, there was questions at the time about whether or not he filmed military positions or whatever. But at the end of the day, he probably should have just been deported because he was like his main thing was he took Russian radio transmissions, he took Russian propaganda, and he just reported it in English from a Ukrainian apartment, and then like rooted for like the bombing of his neighbors. And so when you're in a national like Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War and arrested and destroyed and got rid of a lot of the pro-Confederate press. People can agree with that. People can disagree with that. But when you're a foreigner guest in the country, you're not even a local, and they have to exist with like pro-Russian locals who like talk about, you know, them taking over. Like I've had these people, like some of them even like cuss at me at once or twice. And it's not like I report them to like the brigade of like arrest them for liking the Russians too much. But he was a foreigner regurgitating Russian propaganda word by word. They gave him multiple opportunities to leave the country. He refused to leave the country. He was detained, and then he died in prison after again trying to like they gave him like, hey, you can leave. Like we're gonna have a trial later, and they immediately tried to flee the country and streamed it, which of course got him then rearrested, and then he died in custody of pneumonia. Now, whether or not he was killed or not depends upon Gonzalo Lira's testimony beforehand, where he says he was tortured with a toothpick in the eye. Provided no evidence to any of this, but makes a lot of claims like that, versus the fact that he smoked 2 packs of cigarettes like a day. And so whether or not that and him being an old man like actually deteriorated his position in captivity when he's like next to a lot of, you know, prisoners of war, who else, like I have no clue. I can't answer that, but that's the only instance I can think of outside of the issue of spying on the press, which is a real issue in Ukraine as people hire like basically eyes to keep like an eye on the press, and they'll try to put like a listening device, but that's not particularly unknown to the American Central Intelligence Agency either when you talk about American journalists. So whether or not that makes or breaks Ukrainian democracy, especially when they have a civil society that will protest against dictatorship and Russia doesn't, I think that's reductive.
Yeah, I agree. They should have just deported him, but I don't want to be obligated to support a country that possibly is doing that, because you don't have anything to say they're not doing that to others. If
or
they're
that
doing
we
it
know
to
for
him,
sure they're doing that.
Right?
All right, so that is going to wrap up the hour of open floor. Excellent exchange from both sides tonight. So what we're going to do here is going to enter to the final phase of the debate, the closing statement. Quick reminder for the live chat. The Q&A is already up there for you guys. So if you got a question for either debater, make sure you drop them in. And if you remember, Super Chats, Rumble Rants, PayPal, Cash App, these questions will take priority. So if they fill up the whole 30 minutes, we won't get to the free questions, but we don't have many tonight. So get your questions in there. With that said, we're going to move here to closing statements. Let me get your correct time.
How long are closing statements?
5 minutes we do for closings. And we're going to start with you, so that'll give JS the last word. So Dylan, whenever you're ready for your closing, I will start the timer up with your voice.
I'll try to keep it short and brief. I think that the conversation we got into, or maybe if there was another talk in the future, we could have gotten more into the idea of, you know, taxation and what should be if we were at the voting booth, what should be taxable, what we would vote for. But the prompt I was originally given was, does the U.S. have a financial obligation? We then said, you know what, let's change it to U.S. have an obligation, because my thing isn't even necessarily a financial obligation. I believe we have a obligation to Ukraine to assist them. It could be through giving them, for example, our old like Vietnam era military transport saves lives. We're going to have to destroy them regardless. This is something that could cost us more money having to destroy rather than giving it to the Ukrainians and bringing upon a faster end to the war and making it more difficult for Ukrainian soldiers to get killed during rotation, which in my experience is when it's most likely for you to get killed. Rotating in and out of positions when I've had my closest calls with drones, and every soldier that I've talked to agrees that that's generally where they have the most risk. So this is something that relatively costs literally nothing to the American taxpayer, right? And something that could give a significant advantage to the Ukrainians who are having to rely on pickup trucks and sedans to rotate. Now, is it true that the Ukrainians could maybe win with pickup trucks and sedans doing the rotations? Yes, with much higher casualties, with much more deaths, and just much more possibility of the Ukrainians getting pushed back. And then cities like Zaporizhia, Dnipro, and Kharkiv become, and maybe even Sumy, become more in range. We're talking about millions of more refugees. We're talking about Ukrainians becoming the most displaced people on the planet. So far, the strategy of not sending aid to Ukraine has brought us no closer to the end of the war. There has been some posturing about whether or not there will be an end to the war by the end of this year, but I also didn't hear any argument about how this specifically got us closer to that point, and rather whether or not the point where we're at now, which is posturing, whether that would have came sooner if Trump back in 2024, 2025, once he actually got in there, said, here's the big aid package I promised when you didn't deliver on 24 hours. I'm both increasing my own credibility, American credibility, and trying to force you to come to the table to negotiate in good faith. The first year of his negotiations was what was the Russians saying, well, I mean, maybe we'll talk in Istanbul. Oh, never mind. Well, we don't even recognize Ukraine as Zelensky as the legitimate president of Ukraine. Well, again, maybe we do. It was all posturing back and forth, mostly playing for the cameras and the media and not playing towards actual negotiations. And so I think that this type of footsie, you might want to call it, this type of ping-ponging back of vague statement after vague statement, committee meeting after committee meeting. We gave the Russians the red carpet. We gave the Russians sanctions relief. We gave the Russians a meeting in the United States, in Alaska, where Trump talked up all of the historical, fantastic things America and Russia has done together, which was actually, it seemed like quite a short list, surprisingly enough. So I don't see how this strategy, which has failed, will service us going forward. And when it comes to the idea as an individual, the U.S. Urban Adventure, he personally disagrees with sending this. He personally disagrees with XYZ. There were people who disagreed in the way he does with every single American military intervention or military assistance program that has ever been done by our government. You could go back, when you hear the Marine Corps hymn, from the shores of Tripoli, we're talking about military interventions immediately after our nation's founding against the Barbary Pirates. And it's not that every single legislator agreed with that intervention against the Barbary Pirates. It's not that every single taxpayer agreed or every farmer said, let's go fight the pirates because we don't like it when our sailors get kidnapped. No, there were disagreement. There were some people who took a position against it. But ultimately, America made commitments. America makes promises. And America made commitments since then. America made alliances. America made trade commitments. America made many commitments on the international stage. Our duly elected representatives have the ability to make commitments. That's what got us into the Geneva Convention. That's what got us into a lot of international agreements that benefits everyone, because we do not want our POWs to be executed. We do not want our people to be war crimed. And so there were certain things that we obliged ourselves to. This is just one of many obligations done by bipartisan administrations, from Trump to Biden, to Obama, to Bill Clinton, going back to sentiment expressed by President Ronald Reagan. So to me, this seems like a pretty easy answer. Yes, the U.S. has an obligation to support Ukraine. That's the answer to the question. But on top of that, it's morally beneficial. It's better for our national security. It will cost us less in the long run and has a better chance of bringing the war to a faster conclusion, which Trump promised to do, failed to do, as the 24-hour peace deal becomes a historical joke. And America's commitment and credibility is torn asunder.
All right. Thank you for that closing statement. And with that, we're going to hand over the mic to JS. And JS, whenever you're ready for your closing statement, I will start the timer up with your voice.
All right. In closing, God enables me to help who I can, including myself, and to love everyone. And he does the same for you, Dylan, whether you know it or not. He's used you to go to Ukraine and spread the message of what's happening there. But instead of using that gift to do things like raising money for charity or different other acts of work, I know you said you're personal about it, but instead of focusing all your attention on that, you've rather decided to canvas for political candidates who will watch America burn. They'll watch us collapse while obligating me and every other taxpayer at the tip of a gunpoint to support Ukraine and all these endless foreign wars that, frankly, Americans are tired of being in. We're tired of supporting it. And the large amount of support in polling for Ukraine, I think that's probably misleading and due to a lot of propaganda still. You talk to yourself about how you aren't able to go to Russia. You haven't been to the Russian side. You haven't seen what's happening over there. I'm not some Putin advocate. I'm not a fan of what Russia's doing, but I'm not a fan of what Ukraine's doing either. Russian people are dying, and I don't think us helping more die to possibly put an end to this conflict is the answer. Our legislation, who we vote for, they determine our obligations at the force of a gun. I'd say that we voted for Trump and we mandated him to end this war. So our obligation as voters and as citizens is to see an end to this war. And I think this would help our national security more. You talked about national security. The national security could be put at risk by supporting Ukraine and having them do further aggression against Russia. This could lead to Russia wanting to attack more of the West or the U.S. I think we should be focused on our national defenses and not every other country's defenses, especially when they're in another hemisphere. And the EU should be more responsible for handling that. And a show of good faith that we're not going to further help Ukraine, I think, could help lead to a resolution of this. I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't think it would happen immediately. I'd like to see it happen before the end of Trump's term, because that's what I feel that we as Americans are obligated to do and what Trump is obligated to do based on what we voted for. And so I hope he can do that. You talked about aid, that it would cost us nothing to give them. If we're talking about charity, then I'm okay with charity. I'm okay with Starlink. I like when corporations and all these people put their money where their mouth is, instead of just flying a Ukraine thing in your bio. Go out there, do like you're doing, give them the humanitarian aid, go help clear the mines, donate money to them, start a fund, do something like that. All of that stuff I'm okay with, because that is optional and it could be beneficial to you. I don't think we're obligated to do something that leads to more death, not as a nation, not as an individual. And I don't think there is a differentiation. When I talk about personal obligations, I am talking about the obligations of this country, because this country is not just a bunch of people in suits and ties sitting up in Congress. This country is not just borders and land. It's the people that make up the country, and it's those taxpayers. So yeah, maybe we could have got into a deeper argument about morality of taxes and what we should and shouldn't be obligated to pay taxes for. But I really, I wanted to kind of learn from you and hear your stances on this. I don't feel compelled. It seems like a loss in aid, less aid, is leading towards better outcomes in the war for Ukraine, and hopefully a potential end to the war soon, just from what I'm reading and I'm seeing and stuff. But I don't know what's propaganda and what's not. You would know better than me, but also you're going to have your biases, which you've admit that you have. And then I just want to end by saying that when this war started, I said, I'll go fight in Ukraine if I could get a nice Ukrainian wife, because they bad. And so I hope that with your time in Ukraine, you got to at least mingle with some Ukrainian ladies or men. I don't know what you're into, whatever you like. But just know Russian women are just as hot as Ukrainian women. So, I'd be just as willing to fight for them if I got a a Russian wife. So that's all I got. I had fun with this. Thanks, Dylan.
What's
And
that
easy.
Warren Zevon song? I didn't know she was with the Russians too. You know.
Thank you for that closing statement and great closing statements from both sides. Out there watching right now, okay, if you are enjoying what you're seeing, make sure you guys like the stream, subscribe to the channel, and so you don't miss any of the debates we host here on Swords of Reason. Also, don't forget to subscribe to tonight's debaters as well. Their links are in the description. Make sure you go show them support for stepping into the arena, sharpening the arguments here in front of you all tonight. And also, if you do want to get on Swords of Reason yourself, make sure you join the Discord, discord.gg/bearcave. You can message me or Tiny Pink Nugget there directly, and we'll get you set up. You can also message me on X, Instagram, stuff like that. I also check those every now and then as well. So before I start the timer for the chat Q&A, I like to ask a question or two to each debater myself, usually based on things I heard or maybe something I think was missed or something that maybe deserves another pass. And then after those questions get answered, we'll begin the official 30-minute Q&A. So for my first questions, I'll start with the no side. So if I'm going to start with you here, JS. If the United States withdraws support and the Ukraine loses significant territory or sovereignty, what responsibility, if any, would America bear for that outcome?
I don't think we would bear this responsibility. I think if this led to threats to Europe, then Europe needs to worry about that first and foremost. We'd have to get into some deeper conversation about should America even be in NATO? Is it our obligation to support every country in Europe forever? I don't think so. If us backing out of Ukraine led to Russia advancing on Europe, maybe that's a conversation we have to have at a future point, but we don't know that that's going to happen. A lot of that, again, is just, this is a war of propaganda from both sides, and we only get a lot of it from one side. So I don't know that would necessarily happen.
All right. And did you have anything you wanted to say to that, Dylan?
I mean, we assured them. That's literally what the Budapest Memorandum says, assure. So, I mean, we did make commitments. We did assure them of certain outcomes, and then we would take those outcomes away. And we could say that doesn't matter as much to us personally as individuals. We could say that the damage to our credibility or these assurances don't matter anymore. But you got to think about this from a moment, from another perspective. From the purely American perspective, you think agreement made 25 years ago. Most Americans only know about the Budapest Memorandum if they know about anything. They don't know about the 2010s. They don't know about, or they don't care much about 2022, maybe. I think most Americans do, but a lot of them don't. But if they look at all those commitments from the outside, what do they say? They say Ukraine had atomic weapons. That's a very powerful thing on the global stage. We are willing to go to war with Iran in order to stop them from having atomic weapons. Ukraine gets an assurance from the United States that if they give it up, their territory will be respected, it will be protected, it will be, we assured we will assist them, we will help them. So I do think that bears responsibility because our word should matter. I think America should not be known as the den of snakes that many countries perceive it as, many foreigners perceives it as. And I think this type of thing plays into that stereotype about the untrustful American that will buy you and sell you. Look at the Kurds, look at the Ukrainians, one after the other, buy you and sell you. And I think that's bad for America long term when trying to make stable relationships.
All right. And
and as for war propaganda, I wish what he said was true, because when I open my Twitter, it is just all complete ass. It is not only on Russia, but on a whole bunch of stuff. There are so many foreign propaganda bots. If you want to learn the Russian take, just scroll long enough. There's enough people from Bangladesh or India who have been paid who knows how much money because of just how the algorithm works for what a daily cost of living is over there, that their motivation to both click farm and they're motivated to work for foreign intelligence operations. So the Russians serve us up their perspective on a silver platter. We've seen that now for 5 years, and we've come back to an even more supportive of Ukraine position than even after a year into the war. I mean, the Americans support Ukraine now more than they did in 2023.
All right. And then, so my second question for you, JS, is so basically, like, if major powers are allowed to like invade their weaker neighbors without like a meaningful opposition from the US, the biggest, arguably the strongest military force in the planet. If a major power is allowed to just invade their weaker neighbors without any type of recourse from the US, what mechanism would prevent that precedent from like encouraging future aggressions elsewhere? Like, if we just allowed that takeover, what would prevent like neighboring countries to say, "Hey, fuck it, we can do the same thing"? I guess.
I don't know if there's a way you could prevent it. The bigger dog's always gonna bully on the littler dog, and I don't think the answer to that is having another bigger dog come in. Like, it's like protecting your little brother from getting bullied at school. You're always going to come in and protect him. You're enabling him and making him dependent on you to save him. And that's what we're doing to Ukraine. We're being like a crutch to them, saying, we got your back no matter what happens, when really that should be their neighbors' responsibility. If their neighbors are worried about Russia, if Europe and the EU are worried about Russia and all that, they should be the ones footing this bill, which they have been doing. They've stepped up their spending. We've stepped down ours, and Ukraine seems to be doing all right. Better, at least, based off of, I know Dylan says that things have heated up lately, but it seems like Russia is backing down. They're slowly being crippled, and I don't think they're going to win this. I thought at first they were going to win, and now I don't think they're going to win this. So that's with us funding them less. I think that the big dogs who are going to step in and protect Ukraine should be the EU, not the US. But that's always going to happen. There's always going to be a bigger neighbor who wants to come in. And so I don't know.
All right. And did you have anything you wanted to say to that, Dylan?
Sure. I'll stick in the big dog, little dog, medium-sized dog analogy, right? So it is true that there always will be big dogs, but that also means that there'll always be paths towards instability. And when we're talking about Europe, we're talking about our largest defense partner, our largest research partner, a continent that largely shares our values. And I'm telling you, there is no other continent on the planet that is closer to values about republicanism, representative self-government. There's not any other continent that's as close as Europe, and that comes from our history of where our Americans came from. You know, where modern Americans settled from. And I think that the economic relationship, if it was to deteriorate, it would have a cascading negative effect on the United States in research, in economics, and when it comes to our defense. Sticking with the dog analogy, one big dog might exist, but one big dog doesn't want to mess with many little dogs that could swarm it. Even more so if it's one big dog, a bunch of medium-sized dogs, and some little dogs all together. No NATO state has been attacked ever in an offensive military war. And the reason isn't because we need to immediately call American soldiers to go die on the fortress belt in the Baltics, but it's because the threat of a war with so many different dogs, including the biggest dog, the United States, has provided stability for the United States and Europe when there has often been instability, not only in the world at large, but in Europe in the many decades that preceded the post-World War II transatlantic relationship developing into the strong place it is now. So I think that it is within the United States' interest, and it is more likely to stop future wars, both when it comes to stability and when it comes to, you know, our defense needs. Also, when it comes to what the United States can provide in Europe can't. They don't have the artillery factories we have. Part of our aid packages that we passed was to expand American artillery factories so we could supply Ukraine's more aggressive 155 artillery stockpiles. They have much more of them now. Now that we don't send them those stockpiles, we expanded it for us, but then the Ukrainians don't get the benefit of what that aid was for, and the Europeans don't have enough to make it up. The Poles are trying to expand, but they're not expanding rapidly enough. They also certainly don't have the air defense systems that we have, and we've decided is in much more use to the United States, being launched off in much more rapid quantities than the Ukrainians do in the Middle East. So I think that there are things that we can provide that the Europeans simply cannot right now due to their dependence and our manufactured dependence on American weapons manufacturing.
You think Russia or you think Ukraine should be a part of NATO?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't. To me, it doesn't have to be. If
You
we
think
can
they
end
should
the
have
war and
nukes?
stop another Russian invasion, okay. NATO is just the one alliance that it has worked 100% success rate, 0% failure rate. If you
think they
join
should have
NATO, Russia
nukes?
doesn't invade you. In Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, there's been open threats. Hell, the Russians even recently said, "Do you think NATO can protect you?" They said this at the United Nations like 2 weeks ago to Estonia in reaction to them continuing to build up their defenses and what they're doing, to prepare against a potential Russian invasion. So, I mean, it's not like the Russians don't have the desire, and it's not like America put this desire in their head. Their desire predates all of our lives.
Do you think that Ukraine should have nukes as NATO? Well, they should be a NATO country armed with nukes.
I think that if they're in NATO, that won't be necessary. But I think Ukraine has the right to reattain atomic weapons, considering the deals that we made with them we didn't respect. And so from Ukraine's perspective, we gave up nukes. You said, we would get security. We didn't get that security. And now we're being invaded by one nuclear power and abandoned by the other. And it was supposed to be the fact that the United States is the other counter to nuclear power there that would stop a Russian invasion. It didn't work. And so whether or not it's a good idea is a separate question. I think that they would have the moral right to.
All right. And so then my questions for your side, Dylan. My first one's going to be, if the United States has an obligation to support Ukraine, what's the specific principle that would determine when America must intervene and when it has no obligation to do so?
I think that the United States should defend the principles that it's outlined previously when it comes to its territorial integrity. As long as Ukraine's territorial integrity is threatened and that there is a future threat of invasion, the United States should provide some ability to both stop that invasion and to deter that invasion. I think that what that would probably mean is in the immediate term, certain defensive aid and cooperation with the American and Ukrainian defense economies, cooperation deals between our companies, as well as agreements on how can they improve and how we can improve off of them. And of course, the continuation of the mineral deal that Trump did eventually agree to. I think that with time, eventually the Ukrainians should be able to have enough deterrence on their own as now the strongest army in all of Europe, the strongest military country when it comes to the military power in all of Europe. But this will require still an American stopgap that deters the Russians from invading again. So I think that in the short term, it will be more expensive, but in the long term, it will avoid a wider war, have a strong American trading partner, gain the Americans all the advantages the Ukrainians have learned from, and increase American credibility while providing a stable economic foundation in Europe still.
All right. And did you have anything you wanted to say to that, Jess?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think there's a way that we're going to stop Russia from invading Ukraine as long as NATO keeps encroaching on Russia's borders. They've been pushing and pushing up for decades, and now they've got the two countries in the Baltic regions, and if they get Ukraine as NATO, then they're going to have that whole I believe it's the Baltic Sea there. Most of the water property that they're moving in too close to Russia, and Russia's tired of it. Russia's going to keep reacting to that. And I don't think, I think America's already refurbished our commitment to them. Yeah, they lost their USSR nukes 32 years ago, but we've defended them. We've funded them militarily. We've given them weapons. We're using them to study. Now we can set up reciprocal deals like the minerals plan, and we can slowly pull back that support, and it can become a more of an alliance instead of us just taking care of you. I think we should work towards that.
I do want to ask a question. I know there's a follow-up question earlier, so
Yeah,
I
go
just
ahead,
want to
go
ask.
ahead. Yeah, this
Do
you're
you
allowed to
think
do a little back and
NATO,
forth there.
if NATO disappeared, if America disintegrated, like we got Thanos snapped and it was all the Yankees and NATO as well, and NATO as an alliance structure disappeared, do you think Russia would become a friendly neighbor? Do you think they would all of a sudden think, Ukrainians are actually an independent culture? Putin has changed his fundamental ideology and this belief about Ukraine, which has existed from before Catherine the Great's time. But of course, Catherine the Great, all the way till now, that has led to the banning of the Ukrainian language, which has led to the targeting of, Ukrainian cultural identity in Putin's fundamental philosophy. Why would NATO's non-existence even stop Russia from invading these states that he believes belongs to him in Russia?
Well, if NATO dissolved, then we might see Putin become more expansionist and imperialist. He might start trying to take those lands. But as NATO exists, that gives him a reason not to do that. I haven't seen Putin as the one who seems imperialist, who's trying to take more and more land. I see NATO doing that. I don't see Russia doing that. They attacked
Chechnya, Georgia,
Chechnya and Georgia,
Ukraine, and all these. Okay, these are just these are flashes in the pan.
These are small country. Georgia's a tiny little country right there.
Ukraine is the largest country entirely within Europe.
Yes, Ukraine, but Georgia, they were small ones. And they all happened under Democrat presidents, by the way. Clinton, Obama, Biden. It seems like when we have a weak president in office, Russia seems to get a little,
Yeah, that's why they're expanding their attacks right now. We have a weak president in office. I agree.
No, this president's been dealing with them, and Russia's been losing while we're giving Ukraine less money.
Rocket attacks. The America says, please don't do that. They do it anyway. Why is it that he negotiated multiple ceasefires? He said there's a civilian ceasefire now. He said there's an energy ceasefire now. The energy ceasefire was broken within 1 hour. I remember because the power went off, right? There was others like ceasefires that he said he negotiated that have just fallen through. If he was respected, then he would have gotten something similar to what he said he was going to get on the campaign trail. And I remember Kerry Lake on Tim Pool's podcast saying that he was going to go so good and it was going to be so great. He was going to end the war while he was still president-elect. These are people that went into his administration. Like, it's not like he didn't have a bunch of people who agreed with him in the admin. That he did. I mean, Steve Witkoff was willing to was talking about the Donbass region like he didn't give a fuck, like slightly. So I just don't buy. I don't buy it.
All right. I have no response.
All right. And then my second question for you here is so what just happened? What did I just do? Why did everything I hit minimize. Okay, my bad. I closed my tabs. So my second question for you, Dylan, is at what point, if there is any, would the risk of direct conflict between the US and Russia outweigh America's obligation to support Ukraine? If there's any.
I think that if it gets to the moment where we know if we take this decision, there will be an atomic confrontation, then this doesn't only put America's security at risk, it puts global security at risk, nuclear non-proliferation at risk, which is part of the reason why I support Ukraine, because if a country gives up its nukes, I think, and then gets invaded like this after assurances, I think it'll be harder for us to convince other countries that maybe they shouldn't have their nukes. I think wars the one against Iran, it becomes much harder to get them to give it up. I think the pressure campaigns against North Korea become more difficult. I think if any other nation state was to pursue atomic weapons, it becomes more difficult if America was the country that said, give up your nukes, we'll protect you, fuck you. Now I understand that might not be how Americans view it, but that's how much of the world views it. And those are the people you need to look through their eyes to understand the decisions they're ultimately going to make, whether we think that's a justified view of the United States or not. So I think that, yes, there is risk about atomic confrontation, but this was true about Berlin. And I remember, there being, I wasn't around at the time, but I remember reading in books during the Berlin crisis, will America trade Berlin for New York? Or what the French would say, will the Americans trade Paris for Washington? Right? As this idea of would America really stand up for them during these atomic confrontations? And we won the Cold War regardless. like the Soviet Union lost, and it seemed that we were able to manage this, and the standards strengthened over time. And most, if not all, of the warmongering or fear mongering that was put forward about atomic weapons and confrontations in this war ended up not coming true. First, it was if there are attacks, into Russia, there will be like any bombings or any type of attacks into Russia, it will mean the end, or the counteroffensives will mean the end. And then, well, maybe it's not any attacks into Russia. If they do deep attacks near Moscow, okay, they do deep attacks near Moscow. Well, if they do any attacks near the presidential, okay, well, they did, and it wasn't. Well, if they take Russian land, and then there was the Kursk incursion, and so all of these barriers that have been put up have been knocked down. So most of the risk for all of the assistance that we need to give Ukraine to bring an end to the war has already been taken on the atomic front. We already made these decisions. We saw the end game. We would have to take some really new, bold decisions to further test the standards here. And I'm not advocating for the United States to bomb Moscow. I'm advocating for the United States to make it easier for the Ukrainians to bomb the war machine and bring the war to an end, which they're already doing with long-range attack drones and domestically produced Flamingo missiles. If we were to give them the weapons to do it, it just means they could do it quicker, and then the war would end faster, which is one of my main points.
Yeah, I think that's a dangerous risk to take, which could lead to the nuclear threat that you're talking about. If we give Ukraine more weapons to attack Russia more, then Putin, freaks out. I know I've heard you talk about this. You don't think he's crazy. You think he's smart. I agree. He's a smart guy. I feel like if we did further aggression on him and helped support Ukraine in further aggression on him, then we're pushing for Russia to react even harder. And this is the threat that the nuclear war is going to start, or something like that. Not us reducing our support and our funding.
I don't know if this is not open anymore, so I want to make sure. I obviously have things I could say.
No, you're fine.
I just think we have asymmetrical superiority and escalation in basically every avenue, and the only avenue the Russians really think that they might have is atomic weapons. But the problem is that once you use the atomic weapon, the can's open. You can't reclose it. It's done. It's the new can of worms. And Russia will probably get cut off by the Chinese and the Indians. And so they might be able to have one big flash, but every single other country on the planet has a reason for the nuclear non-proliferation standard to last. And if Russia starts throwing nukes, then their entire structure for continuing the war as an entity starts to collapse in on itself. It's why every single one of these standards, American decision makers made the choice to eventually step forward, because they looked and they said, it's not really that big of a risk. It's why Trump seized Russian shadow tanker fleets outside the coast of Venezuela. That was more aggressive than what Biden did. And what was the result? Nothing. The Russians tried to run away. They still got caught. They changed their flag back to Russian, still got caught. And so and now the French just seized the Russian shadow tanker fleet hundreds of kilometers off of their shores. So I think that we have more room to work with than people give credit for. And it's not historically strange. It was true in Afghanistan, and it was true for the Soviets in Vietnam. Their anti-air weapons were used against our boys.
Cool.
All right. All right. So now we're gonna get into the Q&A here from the chat. Let me just pull up. Sorry. Studio, because I don't see too many in the. So we're going to get through those quick. Let me just pull up the questions. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start up the timer here for the official 30-minute Q&A here. Where's that timer? Sorry. And then we're going to go through all the super chats. Like I said, chat, all the super chats, PayPals, Cash Apps, Rumble Rants will take priority. And then we'll get to the free ones. But we don't have too many here in the super chat, so we should have plenty of time for those ones. So let's go ahead and get this started here. First, Sempiternal Chaos for $2 is showing some support. I appreciate that. Thank you, Sempiternal Chaos. Premonition News just becoming a new member, or I think she upgraded actually her membership. Thank you very much. Joseph coming in for $5 just to show some support. I thank you very much for that, Joseph. Darth Theranis coming in for $5 says, stop using U.S. taxpayer money to fight for this Israeli colony. 80% of government positions in Ukraine are held by Jews. That's the only reason they care.
Is that true, Dylan?
No. I don't know if they're talking about the cabinet, if they're talking about like the president's Jewish, but the majority of Ukrainian MPs are not Jewish. Where they're talking about the Servant of the People Party, the opposition, or there's him, there's Yarm. I mean, there are high influential Jews, but you got to understand from my perspective how difficult it is. So on one hand, how'd you be like Ukraine's run by Jews, that Nazi country? Like it's a very interesting dynamic to have to exist in.
I agree with the question. It's always Israel's fault.
Oh shit. All right, thank you for that. And then over on JS's side, I see you got something here from Gary Johnston. Oh, sorry, I had clicked it there.
What up, Gary?
Says for therapy, you delusional fuck. I don't know who he's talking to.
Guess he's sending me money to get therapy.
Session, I think. All of us.
Yeah, I'm anti-therapy, so I'll just gonna be taking your money for absolutely nothing. Thank you for the $1.32.
That's what's up. That's what's up. All right, so that looks like it for the super chat questions for now. So, Chad, if you want to bump yourselves up, go ahead and send in a super chat. First one comes in here in the chat from Goofy and Mickey. Says, should we sell Here, let me put it in this banner so you guys can read it too. Should we sell F-35s to Ukraine?
Me? No,
Probably
I don't think that's a good idea. I think F-16s is fine, but America hasn't given any weapons in the F-16. Like we've given weapons that can be launched from F-16s. We have not given any planes. We've not given a single plane. What America did is we said other countries in Europe can give the F-16 to Ukraine, and then there was a bunch of people, whether it be like Crystal Ball and Breaking Points or other alternative media hosts who said America gave them jets and now they're doing X, Y, and Z. We didn't do any of that. Europe gave them jets, but there's re-exportation agreements about a lot of these weapon systems that we sell. Again, we made Europe dependent on our weapon systems, and then we act like this is like a switch that can be turned on and off. Like even there was some acknowledgement earlier in the debate about slowly reeling back. Now we might disagree about whether or not there should be a reeling back, but in order to reel, you got to do 1, 2, 3, 4. There's difference between reeling back and cutting the line. And currently, that's what it feels like under the Trump administration. Whether you talk about the conflict in Greenland causing a national crisis as we really go to war with fundamentally American values about self-determination and the right to people to rule themselves, or when it comes to the abandoning of the Ukrainians. So I think there's a difference here.
Should we sell F-35s to Ukraine? Well, you were talking about giving. The key word there is sell. I don't know. The capitalist side of me says, if they can afford it, then let them buy it. But no, I think there should be I'm assuming the F-35s is like our top of the line jets. And that's why you said, F-15s. Yeah, I think it's good to have a line of where this is our best weapons. We're not going to sell this to you, but we'll sell the ones below. But selling, I'm fine with selling stuff and making deals. Reciprocation is what I want to see. Not just constantly throwing money at a war and feeding the war machine for something that I don't think should be our business right now. There could be times when we're obligated. I think people might misunderstand what I'm arguing there. There could be times when we're obligated to help our neighbor because maybe our own defenses, but I think our obligation to Ukraine is played out, and we should get out of it.
Can I ask you what reciprocation do you want to see exactly? Because there's been tech, obviously training. There's been agreements, like what Trump asked for in the middle agreement. He gave them after some negotiation, even though it started from a very radical position. We should own all the bridges. We should own all the roads. Very radical position that no nation state would agree to. But the Ukrainians still engaged with what might have been a non-starter and got it to a final agreement. So when it comes to reciprocate or our support for America in Iraq, like they put their soldiers at risk, what level of reciprocation is necessary? giving up its atomic weapons for our security. Like they want reciprocation for that.
Mainly like the mineral deal, like rare earth.
They agreed.
And if we are, so it's kind of like with Israel with the Iron Dome, we help them build the Iron Dome, but then we study it so that we can make the Golden Dome over here in America one day. In the same way, if we're helping them, but that it's benefiting us, then I would be okay with that. But again, that would not be an obligation. That would be a beneficial choice that we're making.
Okay. We had a conversation about obligation, and I think at some point I kind of like laid down, like I think we were having two conversations. I think that the obligation is there, but I also think that it benefits us on a level when it comes to all of these different weapons developments, the future of our economic relationship with the Ukrainians, what this means for Europe's general economic stability, what this means for like American credibility, atomic security, what this means for the United States global reputation, which does matter. Definitely in the age of terrorism, and the global war on terror might generally be considered over, but that doesn't mean terrorism is gone. Like I think that all of these things show potential avenues for support and assistance. But if the United States doesn't support Ukraine, if Ukrainians feel both scorned by Russia and the United States, there is a scenario where they they just say, fine, we're not going to give any of this. The mineral deal is dead. We're not going to give you drone assistance, and we'll have to go about it ourselves. Hell, America asked for help in Iran. They got Ukrainian drone pilots to the Middle East to help protect American soldiers when Iranian shaheeds, which the Ukrainians have the most experience of with any country in the world, they helped shoot them down. They took their soldiers during a war for national survival and put them out of their country to protect our troops instead of their cities. Like, how much more reciprocal can it get?
Yeah, if they do something for us,
200 men, to be clear.
Or if there's
men.
right, and if there's a trade deal or something like that, then we do have an obligation to fulfill our side of the deal. But the support, I wouldn't call that support. That's a reciprocal deal that both sides benefit from. And so it's like if I make a purchase, if I want the item, I'm obligated to give you the money, but I'm not obligated to even get that item in the first place. And that's not support. That's a mutually beneficial deal. Support seems to be like one-sided. We're helping them and we're getting nothing back in return.
Ukraine supported the United States in the Middle East by sending drone pilots to take down drones attacking American bases when there were no air defense available really for the base in Syria that was under multiple air attacks. Like, American soldiers died, and maybe more could have died depending on a lack of like international support being there from the Ukrainians. So for me, what did they get for that? Well, they didn't get an aid package. They didn't get any new support thing. This was an attempt by the Ukrainians to not only pay back the support the United States has given, but to continue to show to the United States that we're a reliable partner. You relied on us in Iraq. You relied on us now. You relied on us giving atomic weapons. You can continue to rely on us in the future. But can they rely on us? Can other partners rely on us?
I think they can. We've given them $185 billion over the past,
if you give somebody
4
a gun,
years.
It's only useful as far as it shoots bullets. And if you have no bullets, you can't shoot.
True.
All right. Next one comes in from this one's also from Goofy and Mickey. Don't we have a treaty with Ukraine?
Do we have a?
We have types of treaties, like for example, like we have types of treaties with the Ukrainians, but there's not like a national defense treaty that would stop another Russian invasion. If there was an agreement between the United States, if the Russians invade, we will send troops. The Russians simply won't invade again, because that's the reason they don't invade the Baltics, and so we don't have a treaty like that. And the Russians want to stop that from happening, so they can invade again. That's part of the reason why. Even if it's like, well, we won't bring them in NATO, but it'll be like a defensive agreement where we only have like a limited amount of European troops that would be triggered as like a reaction force, not even a force that necessarily on its own could stop Russian invasion. They still reject this because they want the ability to invade again. So I think that we have made security agreements and made assurances, and because it's the word assurance and not treaty, people try to say, well, that means we don't need to abide by our word. It's very snakish. Like generally, like I think it's spiritually snakish to say, well, I use the word assurance or I use the word agreement. So really our word there doesn't matter. Our word only matters when it's treaty. But because I think the same people that even if it was called a treaty, I don't think that would change their position. So, no, we don't have the treaty that we would like, but we have agreements, we have assurances, and we have some types of treaties.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a treaty, but it seems like you want continued assurance after assurance after assurance, and it doesn't seem to be solving the problem. There's always
Just
going to be
one.
war. You want one assurance that we're going to continue to support them. How much for how long?
I think that a defensive agreement could be indefinite. For military aid, it would probably be for maybe 2 to 4 years, and everything past that would probably be reciprocal training agreements. And like, because we keep seeing NATO soldiers in these reports, entire NATO unit wiped out by 3 Ukrainian drone pilots. It's like I cannot emphasize enough how much America can learn and continue to learn from the Ukrainians that will save their own soldiers' lives in the future, if and when America has another war in the future.
I just don't think an indefinite commitment to anything is realistic, especially when we're talking about
worked for NATO for like 80 years.
Yeah, but you don't know what the future holds. Indefinite means
That's exactly why we need alliances, because we don't know what the future holds.
Yep.
All right. Next one that comes in. This one came from Roman King. Says, JS, are you comfortable giving up our strategic advantage we have over our European allies by allowing them to fend for themselves rather than relying on our might? Nuclear proliferation increase.
Comfortable giving up our strategic advantage we have over European nuclear proliferation increases. I lean toward, I'm not totally isolationist, but I lean toward us focusing on our own national defenses and our own borders rather than playing world police to everybody and protecting everybody in every single war. I believe that we would still maintain a strategic advantage and be the strongest country in the world if we, rather than NATO in perpetuity, indefinitely, nuclear proliferation increase. I think the mutually assured destruction thing, like Dylan was just talking about, I think that would still hold up even if we didn't have I don't know, giving up our strategic advantage over European allies. I think we would still have a strategic advantage over those European countries, even if we weren't their ally. I don't think they're going to attack us, but.
What about organizations like, Five Eyes and the intelligence sharing, or research and development, or American defense companies being primary suppliers for Europe, or trade stability? I mean, Trump, of course, has had some trade spats as well, not to mention the territory disputes, which are now bumbling up. These are more opportunities for America to engage. It's wild to say this, but America to engage with wars with new fronts. People used to talk about China, people used to talk about Russia. People didn't talk about Greenland and a war with the Danes and a EU unified. Like, this is totally outside of the paradigm of our previous agreements, which was to defend the territory in North America and across the Atlantic. What Reagan said, what all these different presidents said. So I think like this kind of shows the threat of introducing instability to this part of the equation.
But haven't we also seen when we fund these countries and we provide them weapons, often within 20 years, they're using those same weapons against us. We've given weapons to the Middle East and then they end up using them against us, and we have to fight wars with people that we're funding both sides' weapons.
Outside of the Mujahideen, which also used a lot of those weapons against the Taliban in the preceding civil war, is there any other example you could think of?
A geopolitical one? No, that's probably the one I'm talking about. But
I agree that that's a real risk, but we can also not take Afghanistan and project that experience. People talk about Vietnam syndrome after Vietnam. There might be a sort of Afghanistan syndrome after Afghanistan. We're not taught, like, American soldiers are not in Ukraine. The American soldiers that are in Ukraine and that have died are American volunteers who have gone over, believed in it, and their flags are now standing in Maidan Square, and like in state honors, they have monuments and stuff.
And you would
so,
be
like, those are the only one in Ukraine. Yes, in Kiev, there's monuments to them. They like take their uniforms, they put them in glass. They put descriptions about what town in America they came from and like stuff like that. They give them like a lot of respect when it comes to like the sacrifice that was made. But America itself, as an entity, we didn't send our Marines. People left the army to go over there and fight. So this is something where we've kept our soldiers from dying in the conflict, at least ones that aren't retired or have chosen to leave. And we have, like, this is, I think, by keeping ourselves out of the war now, it benefits us in the long term rather than increasing instability that makes it more likely that America gets dragged into a war, which historically, when wars pop off in Europe, America gets dragged in. It's been the case since World War I. And you might disagree with that. And, I even might disagree with that. But at the end of the day, that tends to be the historical pattern that I think we should be prepared for and try to avoid entirely.
would that cross a line putting boots on the ground in Ukraine? Would you be against that?
Like after this war is over? Or right now?
Or during the war, like right now?
During the war, I think from the United States, it would not make much sense. I think certain European states, when it comes to Western Ukraine and air defense systems, I think it would make more sense since Russia has bombed Romania like 2 days ago. And like there's like bombs that are flying into EU states, into NATO states. And so you could have a priority that we need to shoot down these drones before they fly into our own countries. Where do you shoot them down? You shoot them down in Ukraine, both putting pressure on the Russians while defending their own nation states. But that's not frontline service. That's also, I'm saying Europe should do that. After the war's over, I think American boots on the ground would be one of the biggest preventative measures against war, because then Russia would have to say, we have to go to war with all of Europe and the United States. Like that's the same reason why American troops in small quantity, surrounded on all sides, was able to keep Berlin taken over, unconquered by the Russians and the Soviet Union post World War II is through this type of incentive building, structure building. I think that type of work is still necessary to prevent wider wars.
And see, even if I agree that all of this could be strategically advantageous, like for us to do this, this is still like a moral question to me. How can you obligate all the American citizens to be on board with sending our guys over there to just stand and guard the border?
Do you think there is no circumstance by which the United States should be able to send foreign assistance to any country ever?
No, but that's not what we're talking about. Being able to send and what strategically.
Newly elected representatives voted for the legislation. Like presidents promised and won on campaigns of sending Ukraine aid in this exact scenario, including the current resident of the presidency. There was multiple administrations that made agreements to this effect. So to me, I can understand, like, if this was all rushed through, there was no debate, there was no conversation. I mean, we've had like a decade of conversation post 2014. There was a conversation when Clinton made the decision. So, I mean, there's been a national conversation. If you agree that it can happen in principle and the American people agree, the legislators agree, the presidents agree, all the agreements agree, I mean, you might disagree personally, but the U.S. still has that obligation, as we talked about.
Yeah, and that's where I disagree. I see there could be benefits to it. It could be the right move to make strategically for a war, but it's not an obligation to all the people that we be involved in a war.
I could accept your framing. I would disagree with the framing, but I could accept your framing as logically consistent if you said there is no circumstance by which the United States can send military financial aid, because you're never going to get every single American citizen to agree on any aid package. There'll always be one guy who said, I don't care if the aliens invaded. There'll be no matter what the scenario, there'll be the one guy who says, I don't believe the state has the right to take my money and send it to any foreigner ever. And so under your framework, it would really handcuff the United States to really do anything in the world stage, or use the threat of doing something on the world stage to prevent having to do something at all.
We can go to the next question. I don't want to keep going around and around on the same question. We'll never get to all the questions.
Yeah,
gotta talk on mute at least once.
I can't see it. There's text in front of it.
Next one that comes in is from the real Daniel Ramirez. Says, what type of obligation does the U.S. have?
We kind of went over that.
I know you guys kind of went over it, but if you want to just kind of
a diplomatic obligation. If a country makes promises, promises are a form of obligation. There's also like a question about obligation to our own national security interests and the benefit of the American people. There's also a question of an obligation to your voters when you make a promise, like if they don't accept a ceasefire on the line of control, which is what Trump said, then I will do X. That is an obligation you make with your constituency. If Trump said, I'm going to do this on immigration, and then he got in office and said, thank you, I am now going to make open borders the best thing ever, and like you'd be violating an obligation you made with your voters. There's different types of obligation. Ukraine has the voting obligation, they have the presidential obligation, they have the treaty obligation, and it is what the voters want. So, I mean, there's like a constituency obligation as well as national security. But of course, that can be disagreed upon on whether it is in America's national security interest. But there's many different obligations and promises and commitments that have been made as the base of this.
Yeah. And I would agree. Trump does have an obligation to end the war because that's what we voted for. And that's why we wanted him. I didn't vote for continued support to Ukraine potentially forever. I voted for an end to the war. So that's what I obligate Trump to do.
I mean, if Trump said he was going to do that and you voted for him, you might have been voting with a different idea in your heart, but that doesn't mean you voted for a guy who said something different about policy. Like if I voted for Harris because I thought that Harris was going to bring about Medicare for all or whatever progressive priority I could put forward, I don't know. And then she said she was not going to do that. Like she said, no, I'm going to do a public option. I can't say, well, you have an obligation. You promised. She didn't promise. Trump said that if the Russians didn't accept the ceasefire on the line of contact, then he would surge aid to Ukraine. So you wanted one thing, but you did vote for another thing. Whether you thought Trump wasn't going to fulfill his promise is another question entirely.
I probably should have asked this in the debate, but I didn't get to a lot of questions because you're very knowledgeable on this. So I kind of just let you talk a bit, but would you give up aid to Ukraine if it meant that you could have universal health care in America? Probably not.
Because I think it would be, we're talking about 4-year wait. Because we're not going to be giving Ukraine $50 billion every year. It would be we give Ukraine like
we end support to Ukraine forever, and we get free healthcare in America forever.
Let me finish quick. If Ukraine was really the main factor that like stopped us from getting healthcare, then it's like I believe I could delay Medicare for all for 4 years, just doing like a mental equation of how many casualties could be caused, how much it will cost us down the line, like. If what I think is true about the budget is true about what this war could cost us if it expanded, then Medicare for all would be impossible in this framework if the war was to expand down the line. So I think it would be beneficial for the economic interests of Americans to deal with it now rather than later.
Next one comes in from this one's from Kyle Swab the Nile. Says, does Dylan believe the U.S. has an obligation to protect every smaller country from a larger neighboring country trying to invade it?
No.
All right.
So how do you decide which one's yes and which one's no?
Well, if we make a promise, that's definitely one thing, because I think America's words matter. Number two, if it benefits America's interests, that's another thing that could advantage it. Number three, if it's morally consistent. For example, if like let's say the reason like the roles were reversed and Ukraine was invading Transnistria because they decided that they were going to do some genocide. I don't know. Ukraine's bigger than Transnistria. But the circumstances of what has happened, like it could change the dynamic. So it's not a question about the size. It's a question about why the war was launched, what the outcomes of the war was, whether or not it was illegal by certain set standards that most nation states have agreed to. So I don't think it's just a question about larger states. I think that Russia's reasons for starting the war are immoral. I believe the way they have conducted the war is immoral. And I believe it is both in America's moral, economic, geostrategic, and credibility interests in order to support Ukraine. So I think that when it comes to Ukraine, we're talking about one country. I think that it would be good to end the civil war in Sudan. I don't think we have the same moral responsibility that we have when it comes to Ukraine. I think we should do our best to end the war too by pressuring the United Arab Emirates, which is a major supporter of the rapid support forces. I think there's other tools we could use on our tool belt to bring about the end of that war than just coming in and like bombing everything. Though I think if there's any country on earth that there is a justified military humanitarian intervention to be argued for, it is probably Sudan. If you read any of the reports of the massacres, these people who are conducting these attacks are genocidal.
All
And
right.
I would just say no. No, we don't have an obligation to every smaller country. I don't think we have an obligation truly to any other country. As a country, our country doesn't have obligations. The individuals in our country have obligations. That doesn't mean we should never help another person or we shouldn't do our best to maintain peace and things like that. But it's not an obligation. It's the right thing to do, and you do it as much as you have ability to do it.
How do nation states make agreements with a country that doesn't have an obligation to anything, including the agreements they make with other nation states? How does any country take that nation state seriously?
We see these agreements broken all the time. We see treaties, Geneva
And that has negative
Conventions,
effects.
international law.
I mean,
Yeah.
like if we have an obligation not to use an atomic weapon in anger because of the nuclear non-proliferation standard and laws that we've agreed to. Like, I think that the obligation would be useful to keep and maintain, not only because of the direct effects of using an atomic weapon, but the loss of American credibility if we were to do such an act. And I think undermining credibility when we're talking about the issue of nuclear non-proliferation is an issue that affects every American.
We have an obligation not to use a nuke until we use a nuke. Because if the obligation was nobody ever use a nuke, then the obligation would just be destroy all the nukes. So,
well, that's what not if you want to keep the nukes at the same time, or you believe that atomic weapons prevent interstate wars between countries like Russia, China, and therefore you want them in limited quantity to stop. It depends on who you talk to in IR. But I would say that it is within America's interest to stop the expansion of atomic weapons. It seems to be a bipartisan agreement that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. Why? Because we do not trust them with the nuclear weapon. We want them to uphold themselves to the same standard that most nation states have. And we're willing to pursue a massive increase in energy spending for Americans. We're willing to pursue a massive bombing campaign, expensive bombing campaign. We're willing to pursue the loss of American lives directly, not by choice, like where they signed up, like, I want to join this war today. Every American that died in Ukraine, it was like that. It wasn't the case for those people who died in those bases in the Middle East. We're willing to accept that all to stop Iran as they're trying to develop this atomic arsenal. In Ukraine's case, they give it up, and now we already got it. So now we can kind of like abandon them. But if that's the case, then nobody's going to agree to that in the future. If we have a future Gaddafi or XYZ type figure and we're like, hey, we don't want you to have nukes, they're going to say, what, so we can end up like the Ukrainians? What, so we can end up like the Iranians? What, so we can end up like Saddam? And I don't think that that is a good turn of phrase or geopolitical standard to set.
but we see throughout history, through all of these international relationships, that obligations are moldable, they're pliable, they're bendable, they change over time. Who we elected now at this time, there's different leadership in Ukraine, there's different leadership in America, there's different public opinion. All of these things change
but the same
and
leader
swing.
made the promise on the campaign trail. If he had a different position, then maybe, but he had the position until like a year and a half ago.
Who, Trump?
Yeah.
No, Trump's position was he's going to end the war day one. That's what I voted for.
Day one, he said he's going to surge aid to Ukraine.
He said he would surge aid to Ukraine if it didn't end.
Surge more aid to Ukraine than Biden.
Then that was a hollow
threat.
threat. That's Trump. That's Trump being Trump. That's Trump grandstanding. He's always said,
And because he didn't deliver on any threat, the war's still going. It's still dragging on, and the war will continue to drag on. The strategy of hollow threats with no action lead the Russians to feel encouraged that their strategy of waiting out the West is working. They can continue the war, and they'll be naively hopeful.
isn't he fulfilling a threat to Ukraine by reducing funding to them?
Not when they agreed. They said ceasefire on the line of contact. They said, yes, we'll do that. They even said, we'll cut off aid unless you agree. And they even give it specifics when negotiations started. Ukrainians said, okay, we'll do that. Then the Russians didn't agree. And then Trump did nothing.
All right. Well, we're at the last second here, but there's one more question came in from Vigilante there, so I'll just put it in there. JS, should we start to pull back support from Israel as well? Why or why not?
Yeah, I think we we spend way too much money in Israel. I do think that there is a lot of mutually beneficial deals that we have with Israel and that we do get a lot of tech from them. And this is the same with Ukraine. If it's reciprocal and we're getting something out of it, then I can see reasons to do it. If it's strategic to our national security, then I can see reasons to do it. My whole thing is obligating us in perpetuity, possibly indefinitely, to make this commitment just based off of deals that are made in the past when things are constantly changing on the geopolitical stage. But yes, we should reduce our support for Israel.
I support Reagan's policy on Israel. He said that they were committing a Holocaust in Lebanon. I think that, I wouldn't use that language because of historical connotations. But I would say that, when you have support for a country, especially a country that has atomic weapons, would admit to having atomic weapons, and has its security largely on lock, I would say, to be quite frank. None of Israel is occupied, unless you have some weird beliefs about Greater Israel. I think that America's role here should be trying to increase regional stability, and that might include, and I think does include, checking the Israelis when necessary. Blank checking a government that is unoccupied and that we didn't commit that we would do this for. Like, I just don't. I don't see the purpose.
You think that we should have zero support for Israel?
I think that they're I think humanitarian maybe, but for military support, I think they should be, any military support to Israel must be contingent on a bunch of factors that this government does not care about.
Okay.
All right. So that is going to wrap up the Q&A for tonight. Thank you to everyone in the live chat for all the questions, the engagement, the support. It's seriously what helps me keep bringing you these entire Swords of Reason experiences week after week. So I appreciate every single one of you. And of course, a huge thank you to our debaters for stepping into the arena tonight and sharpening their ideas in front of all of us. Before we move on, let me check real quick. Are either of you planning to hang out for the open panel tonight?
I got like 20 minutes, so yeah, for a little while.
I can do a similar time, but I also got to use the bathroom between then and now.
Okay, we get a break.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna roll the debate outro song and video. Runs for about 4 minutes. Perfect time. Everyone go hit the washroom, grab a drink, stretch your legs, whatever you need to do before the chaos and chill begins. During that outro, I'm going to drop a link in the chat for anyone who wants to join the open panel. Come test your ideas, continue the conversation on tonight's topic. Anyone is welcome to hop in. Just come ready to think, question, debate. If you're coming up to try and troll, spurg over everyone, bring personal dramas, anything like this, you're just going to get muted and then most likely booted real quick. So while you're ahead with this idea, just...
Can I ask you a question first?
Yeah.
I'm looking at your thumbnail. I just went on YouTube, put on some music while, I go to the bathroom. And I see the thumbnail you put. Did you AI edit our eyebrows to be furrowed more to make it look like we were particularly...
Yeah, I took pictures of you and I made the AI make your angry faces. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. I mean, you look particularly peeved at me, but I look like I'm ready to do criminal behavior. I'm going to bring this on the screen quick. Look at that. Look how angry I look. I look furious.
That's great. Yeah, so like I said, anyone's welcome to come up. If you're coming those for personal dramas, yelling over everyone, stuff like that, you're just going to get booted, so don't do that. And one last reminder, make sure you guys go subscribe to both debaters. Their links are in the description. And if you enjoy these debates, hit subscribe on the Speakeasy channel as well so you don't miss any upcoming Swords of Reason battles. Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. This is where logic meets passion. All right, let's roll the outro, and I'll see you all in a few minutes for the chaos and chill.
circle where the echoes collide. Truth through the static, no place to hide. Iron tongue, sharpened fire in our breath. We dance with conviction on the edge of death. Your words are bullets, mine are storms. Ideas forged where lightning forms. No retreat, no treason. This is the season. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through lies with steel precision. No faith, no fear, just raw collision. We clash our swords of reason. Facts burn brighter than a prophet's flame. Egos crumble, but the truth remains. Every scar, a mark of thought's crusade. In the battlefield of minds we've made. Speak your truth, but bear the cost. Every claim can still get lost in the war of voice and vision. Feel the friction. We clash our swords of reason. No silence left for indecision. Ideas break with loud precision. We clash our swords of reason. Strike me with logic, I'll bleed my proof. We cut through chaos to carve out truth. Let the sparks fly, let the echo scream. This is no debate, it's a metal dream. We clash our swords of reason. In the storm of thought's collision. Forged in fire, pure precision. We clash our swords of reason. Reason bleeds but never dies. No surrender, no retreat. In the war of words, we find a beat. Swords of reason. Oh.
And we're back. Welcome in, everybody.
Hello.
Hola.
Okay, I'll go first.
I want all the trash talkers in the chat to come up here and destroy Dylan.
Well, JS, I want you to know that according to the chat, you're a filthy communist.
Oh,
I don't know where that came from. I'm in the chat like, JS is not a communist. I know the guy. And they're like, no, he's a communist. And like, no, he's not. They're like, fake news. I'm like, okay, he's not a communist. Okay.
Whoever is a communist. Okay, because I never stay very long. To the young man who I've never met, I'm the old lady. Dylan, I don't know you. But hello.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, there's some. You guys can think of me what you want. Everybody else knows I'm old and I never stay very long. Okay, so I want to really turn on your brain here. Not that you're really a smart kid. You are. You're really smart. But I'm gonna put some things out that maybe you guys are too young or don't realize this. First off, the first thing I'll say is when Obama, these guys already know this, when Obama stopped the space shuttle program. How did we get to space? Do you know how we got to space? Do you know how we got up to the space station and back, Dylan?
We
I'm gonna
worked with the
assume with a
Russians.
rocket ship.
No, the Russians carried us. We flew. The Russians flew us back and forth
In what?
in their rockets, and then they
Oh, it was a rocket ship, and I was right.
Just not us, America, not a.
She's saying we worked with Russia at one point.
Yeah, we had to.
Russia, but
We had to recently, making us working partners, and our guys didn't just go up. They worked together in the space station, and then they got into the little thing, and they dropped down because Russians land on the ground with and then they have to sit in the chairs after they're done. So we Russia and we have worked together. We're allies. And not only that, we're natural allies. And not only that, the Ukrainians and the Russians are the same people. Okay? They're not supposed to be fighting. They're actually, if you go back far enough, these guys are allies, should be allies. And this is what my point is this. I'm just throwing this out there. Okay, there are people that have been like Soros, okay, and the old money people who have been actually controlling the whole situation this whole time. Most of what people hear is propaganda. Okay, and they've got everybody running along in their hamster ball.
Where are you going? Where are you going, Premonition?
Well, where I'm going,
Go ahead.
Yeah, come on, keep going.
they're trying to get the Christians. Russians are Russian Orthodox. They're Christians. They're trying to get the Christians to kill each other. The last thing on earth that these people want is for the Russians and the United States to be allied. And like the Cold War that maybe you guys don't remember, which was not a war, but they called it the Cold War. All that was a giant propaganda thing to keep Russia and America pretending like they were fighting with each other when they never really were.
no, the
So-
Cold War was basically Russia and the United States both having a dick measuring contest, going, "Mine's bigger than yours," and neither one of them wanting to actually whip it out. That was basically what the Cold War was.
Right. So it wasn't a fight. There was no Cold War. They just say there was. So what I'm saying here, I am so against the Ukrainian. I am so tired of war. That's all I've seen my whole life. Okay. And I have become a complete isolationist now. These guys know I'm over the edge with that. But Russia and the United States have been allies and should be allies and are natural allies. And this fighting and any type of, we're going to give you money for this and these weapons for that, I'm done. I'm done with it. And I'm also done with having Israel tell us what to do.
Do you think we should be obligated to support Russia?
Russia can support itself. We're obligated to be allied with Russia, just like we're obligated to be allied with Ukraine and England and all the.
I think we're obligated
But what's
to
the
be allied with anybody.
obligation?
I
Yeah,
agree.
but what's the obligation?
Well, go
Like,
ahead.
why
Go.
must we?
Well, if we want to have a happy planet, then maybe we should try stopping the stupidity that we've all fallen into for God only knows how long, and knock it off.
Well, I think you can make a
Iranian-
better
Yeah,
argument that America should.
Dylan, did you have a response there to what do you think about that obligation to Russia and allied?
It was more of a question to the room than to me, but I mean, I could say many things to that. I mean, the space station gesture was a friendly gesture, but it wasn't an alliance. And the Russians also have asked for our assistance when it comes to their space program. So have many countries, but that doesn't give them like an excuse to break the agreements made with the United States, like the Budapest Memorandum, which they broke by invading Ukraine in 2014 and broke again by invading them in 2022. And I don't want to be allies with human safari hunters, those who oppress Protestants and Baptists and evangelicals in occupied territory. Like, I don't want to be an ally in those actions. And I think that if you're everyone's ally, you're really nobody's ally.
The Russians
If you
are
make the
Christian.
umbrella so big that everybody's in the tent, then the tent doesn't really matter at all. It's just the sky. It's no longer the tent. And
Why
I
do
will
we have
say,
to
like,
have a bunch
the
of different
idea that
tents?
Ukrainians are Russian, go tell the Irish that because they speak English, they are English. And we'll
There's
see
actually a
the
large
reception
section of Ireland that
that
still
you
speaks in
get.
Irish Gaelic.
Just because they speak English doesn't make them English, though. I mean, whatever percentage speaks Gaelic doesn't really matter to the fact that there is a cultural distinction, a national distinction between the Irish and the British, the English, the Welsh, the Scots. These are all different people. The Ukrainian language has more in common with Polish than it technically does Russian. Like, it has its own unique, distinct history and legacy. They aren't the same peoples. You can go back and make many peoples the same. Okay, we go back. How many countries that are
I
modern
wasn't trying to make
day
them the same.
states made up ancient Gaul? Oh, they're all the same people because of Gaul. No, they're a modern people. Our nation state existed for less time than the national embodiment of what Ukraine is. Voltaire talked about Ukraine as an entity. Their culture is developed in that time, but they're real.
There's no reason for this war. There's no reason for us to be paying for this war. There's no reason for it at all. None.
I think you could actually argue the United States would actually
Reason
be
for the war
would
is
actually
the
be far
Russians
better off
invaded.
if they partnered, if they actually were allied with Russia as opposed to Ukraine. I think that allying with Europe is basically, destroying America at this point. Because Europe
I think
does
if you're
not represent
anti-Christian,
America's
you can
values.
ally with Russia. I think if you're like against evangelicals and Baptists,
I
and
am.
Like, there was 40 Protestant churches in Metropole. They've all been shut down.
I am
because
against
they're Yankee
evangelicals
churches.
and
They're
Baptists
American
and
churches. They're Yankee type Christians, and so they're not trustworthy to the Central Russian state. Like, if you don't care about these things, if you don't care about values, you can make an argument that I guess Russia's army is strong, but its resources are not necessarily that plentiful that we need them.
You are
It's not
aware
like
that
they
the
have
Russian
something we
Orthodox
need.
have been in America
Europe
almost
has
as long
much
as the
more for us
Protestants, right?
than the Russians do.
You are
What
aware
about
that the Russian Orthodox have been in America almost as long as the Protestants, right?
The Russian
There's more
Orthodox.
Protestants than Russian Orthodox in the United States, and the
Yes,
Russian Orthodox is
yeah, but you're saying like what
controlled
does
by
that
the
have to do with
government.
anything?
Protestantism is inherently anti-central control, and the evangelical church is also, like, we're talking
There's no
about
such
an
thing as the
entire
evangelical church. It doesn't
branch of
exist.
Christianity.
Point me to the evangelical church.
Orthodox Christianity still exists in Ukraine.
Yes.
Well, but see,
Right.
this
The head of
actually
the Russian
speaks.
Orthodox
so,
Church
like-
said, "You go to Ukraine, you kill Ukrainians, you go to heaven." That's going to make you against, like, Ukrainian government's not going to be happy with that.
What?
That's not the position
So-
of the Russian Orthodox Church.
No,
That's the position
So-
of the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, the premier patriarch.
It's interesting
So
the way
Premi-
premonition though is empathetic to Russia.
Like, he was the patriarch of the
and
Russian
support-
Orthodox Church. He was the patriarch. That's the head. That's the head.
What I-
Hachim, that's
Yeah,
the
the
big
Patriarch
guy.
of
Right?
Moscow. You're telling me that Patriarch Kirill says that if you kill Ukrainians, you go to
If
heaven.
you kill Ukrainians, that helps you get to heaven. Yes, he
Can
said
you show
that
me
in
that?
part. Kirill is a strong Putin ally. This is not surprising. I mean, he got his position because he was allied with Putin in 2009, and his strength and allegiance with the government is what partially got him put to the position that he's in. I mean, there's tons of spying that goes on with the Russian Orthodox Church in the United States. It's a major spying apparatus in America for the
Really?
Russian
Can you
government.
demonstrate that? I don't know if you know this, but I am real course.
That has been
Please
found during
demonstrate
the
all the
Trump
spying that we
administration.
do.
They found agents entering the United States with documents on how to set up spy rings. It's
there's
documented
agents
fact.
everywhere.
The Russian
There's agents
Orthodox
everywhere,
Church is
dude.
a
There's
massive
fucking
spying
there's more.
operation.
I would
It
say
is.
we have a much bigger problem with the
No.
Chinese buying land in America as opposed to Russians coming to the United States and attending road
Well, I mean,
churches.
I don't cover. I mean, I'm not in Taiwan. I cover the Russians in the war that I report on and I do reporting on. If you want to talk about Taiwan, that seems like a separate day, separate discussion.
But Dylan, these guys are
Taiwan.
sympathetic to Russia, but they don't feel that the U.S. is obligated to support Russia, and I think that's why I don't have a side here in this battle. At first, I was
You need to
anti-Ukraine
make
because
no promise to support Russia in a defensive war, and they don't need those types of commitments because they have atomic weapons. We asked the Ukrainians to give them.
right, but I don't think that whether I'm sympathetic to Russia or Ukraine, I don't think I have an obligation to either one of them.
Yeah, that's my
Well,
position.
you
I'm saying
don't need to
I
have a
think you can make
personal
a better
obligation, but our
historical
state
argument.
has an obligation.
That's why I didn't go
The
into
government-
like. I'm not going to
Okay, real quick.
defend
Well, then
Russia,
Dylan, hold on. So I heard you make this
but I'm
point
also
multiple
not going to
times.
defend Ukraine.
So I've had this
Sorry,
question.
I don't. There's I don't. There's two
Well,
people
real quick,
talking. I can
Dylan, let
only
me ask you
answer
a
one
question real
question.
quick. Let me ask you a question. Okay, so I work between 50 and 60 hours a week, right? I'm the sole provider for my daughter and wife, and I can barely make ends meet as it is. So how much of my check should go to
Yes,
Ukraine?
you should pay taxes to support
No, how much?
Ukraine,
How much? How much of my check should go to Ukraine?
like maybe half of a percentage point or less, probably less.
You think so? I'm obligated to
I
give
think
money
like
to this
maybe like a
government that lives
nickel a day.
across the pond that I
Like
don't
literally,
care
like if we're gonna talk about the amount we've sent, the nine. I can tell you the exact
300
percentage,
million
okay?
nickels
There
a
is a
day.
Ukraine support package on the table right now. We're talking about $9.2 billion. If we were to break that out between all of the American people, we're talking about like a few cents. So I'm pretty comfortable with that. Yeah.
I'm
Well,
not
shouldn't we focus more
comfortable
so
with
on our issues
international
here than what's
atomic
going on in
security
Russia and Ukraine?
for a nickel a day. I will take that tax bet. Absolutely.
I'm not comfortable with that. I'm also
which
not
country
comfortable with
actually
us
is closer to
paying-
That's
Well,
a
we're a
lot.
republic, and you can vote your way. I'll vote my way. But like,
Well, which
I'm
country?
comfortable with
Which
it.
country do we actually basically share a border with? That's more of a threat to us.
Is
Is Ukraine? If we
what
stop giving
countries
support
a
to
threat to
Ukraine,
us, or what? Like,
if we stop giving
you talking
support
about
to
the issue of
Ukraine.
immigration?
No,
Because Mexico
no.
ain't gonna invade us.
That's not what I'm talking
there's,
about.
Like, if there's cartel threats and stuff.
That's not what I'm
like,
talking. I'm not talking about
Mexico
Mexico,
is no
dude. I never said
territorial
anything about
threat to
Mexico.
us.
No, so what I'm asking you is, do you think that if the United States pulled funding from Ukraine and we pulled all support from Ukraine and said, you know what, Ukraine's on their own, we don't care, that's more of a threat than if we said we're going to fully take the side of Ukraine, fuck Russia. Russia's now our enemy.
Yeah, I do think it would be worse if we did the former. Yeah.
You think it'd be worse if we just said Ukraine's on their own, even though we literally basically share a border with Russia?
Yeah, I think it's fine. I mean, we fought a whole Cold War in multiple, like people, you can say the Cold War wasn't a
That's
war.
not war.
People died in Vietnam. People died in Cambodia. People died in these places as fluctuations and outgrowths of the continental and ideological struggle between communism, capitalism, Soviet Union, the United States.
Yeah,
Like,
do you think
people
that
did
Putin
die
wants
in
to
that
reestablish
if
the
I'm
we
USSR?
avoided an atomic war with the Russians. And people have, this has happened in all ages of human history. Like, no, we're tired of war. I'm very sorry to say war will not end by the end of your lifetime. It will probably not end by the end of my lifetime. I'd very much
Yeah, I
like
agree
it to
with
be. I would like to be unemployed. But sadly, that's not the world we live in.
So do you
I'd
think-
like
real
to
quick, do you think
minimize
that-
the
do
death
you think
on
that
my
Putin wants
hands.
Do you think Putin wants to like reinstate the USSR?
Not the USSR. What was the quote from Putin? He said, anybody who doesn't like look upon it fondly has no heart, but those who ask for its return have no brain. He wants more of something that's similar to probably the Russian Empire and Russian domination before the USSR. Something maybe close to what the Romanovs had.
Yeah, so like basically like the empire of like Saint Tsar Saint Tsar Nicholas II.
His borders and what he claims as Russia has changed. Like he just says if there's
I'm saying
Russians
closer
living
to
there,
that than the
and
USSR.
if it's on Russia's border and there's Russians living there, he believes that they have a claim to it. So technically, you could say any country that Russia's borders that there's Russians living in, like they have a territorial claim to on Putin's standards. What is actual, like what is achievable, is a separate question than what
No, that's not what I'm
Putin
asking.
would actually want.
I'm asking, do you think he's closer to like wants the empire that Saint Tsar Nicholas had or the USSR? Like, what do you think if he could have it?
What
if
he
had his
would
druthers-
want, he'd rather have something similar to the size of the USSR. What is achievable is different.
Why would you think that he wants something the size of the USSR?
Because he said that any country that is tied to the USSR, is ultimately like part of the Russian world. Any country that Russians living with it, Russian speakers, they have a right to go in and protect those like they did in Ukraine. And that includes what? Kazakhstan, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, basically every single other Central Asian state that Russia borders. Hell, that even includes countries like Finland. Like there is a lot of countries that get caught up by the definition. Moldova is another country that could get caught up by the definition. And Russian troops are already illegally stationed in Moldova. Romania, there's a lot of countries that get caught up in this definition. So they tend to also all be Soviet countries. Now, does that definition extend deep into Poland and Germany? Somewhat, but I don't see him making claims to want to claim them now. State TV says they want to bomb these countries, but that's not what Putin says openly. So I think he's aiming at what's in sight. I mean, back in the 2008, 2009, he said Ukraine could join the EU. Hell, even Ukraine could make its own decisions about joining NATO. But that's because invading Ukraine was not attainable then. What will be attainable in the future will change his appetite.
And then I have one more question for you. Do you think that if the United States didn't provide billions in support, that the Ukrainian-Russian war would have been much more in Russia's favor?
I think it would have been more in favor of Russia. Yes, I don't know if the war would be over at this point. It's like counterfactuals, but I think it would have been worse.
I'm surprised that you think NATO should be a. Hold on one second, Premonition. I'm surprised you think Ukraine should be part of NATO when in 2021 Putin was demanding the 1997 borders for like the old Iron Curtain, which of course he's never going to get that. He's not going to get Poland and stuff like that.
Oh wait, let's just pause on that. Old Iron Curtain borders. Just want to throw that up there again for like how big his appetite can be. But continue.
Right, but if there could be an agreement made where, like they had, where Ukraine is the borderland and it remains neutral, why would you not rather have that agreement made when you say you support? Hold on one second. Hold on. I'm not done yet, Dylan. When you say you support Ukraine becoming a NATO country, you are supporting an encroachment and violations of those same agreements that you were mentioning throughout. So, why would you support? Isn't that part of the Minsk 2? Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, that they're not that Ukraine's going to stay independent, the borderland, the buffer zone between NATO and Russia, and that they are pushing up on Russia when Georgia and you have the Baltic countries up there in the north, they are moving.
I mean, Trump is pushing forward on like more American involvement in Armenia and Georgia and all these countries that are like in Russia's periphery. Ukraine's just the one that he seems to be much more conciliatory on the idea, but there was never any agreement that was long-standing that we cannot expand NATO or we will limit the countries that join NATO. When you talk about Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, the Russians didn't fulfill their end of the bargain. The Ukrainians didn't fulfill their end of the bargain. And negotiating,
so a deal was broken.
Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, it was such a shit show. We say this is the closest we got to peace, but it really just shows how far away we were from peace. For just one example for Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, the Russians say that they're going to respect Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, and they're not going to have their soldiers in Ukraine. That they will not do that. And so the Ukrainians are like, okay, fantastic. So can you withdraw from your positions in the Donbass? And the Russians say, what positions? We don't have positions in the Donbass. There are no Russian soldiers in Donbass, so there's nothing for us to withdraw. The Ukrainians say, we can see them. Those tanks did not appear out of the ether. These weapons, those are clear. That's a Russian tank unit right there. That's clearly Russian. They just took the insignias off their arms and crossed the border. There's been a ton of testimony since then where like train drivers and people who move the logistics have testified to this since. So that agreement from the get-go wasn't going to move because there wasn't even an agreement about what was being violated when it was being agreed to. It's like, for example, Trump agrees to a civilian ceasefire with the Russians. He also agrees to an energy ceasefire with the Russians. It gets violated within an hour of it being agreed, both embarrassing the United States, blowing it up in Trump's face, and showing that like it's not as simple as just like getting this on paper.
Yeah, and I know Putin's demands are a little extreme, but if there was some sort of peace deal where maybe he gives back what is it, Luhansk and Donetsk. I'm not good with all these words, but let's
Sounds
say
like one of them Slavonic words.
if there were some sort of pathway to peace, which means Ukraine does not join NATO and it stays independent, wouldn't that be a better option than?
That'd be. I don't think it'd be a better option, but it's an option most Ukrainians, and I think I'm not Ukrainian, but I think I would accept if I was Ukrainian, if there was an agreement that Ukraine got its territory back, but they didn't join NATO, and they operated like a Finland, like they went through like Finland. They went through like a Finlandization process, constant like kind of conscription program where they're always ready for a future Russian invasion, and maybe European and U.S. support could re-trigger in some avenues the Russians invaded again to disincentivize the future Russian invasion. I think something like that would be a much better foundation for peace than the jostling and pussyfooting that we're doing right now. But ultimately, like NATO's like the slam dunk. It's like what has worked every single time. And so it's always going to be like the gold standard for stopping you from getting invaded by Russia because that's what
it seems like it's worked to piss Russia off. repeatedly.
Well, I'm fine pissing Russia off. That's like Russia can be
I
pissed
think
off.
we should.
It's
maybe
the question
not
of
be
what we
pissing
can
Russia
agree
off.
to. If the Russians are mad at the negotiating table, that doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is whether they will agree or not, because their position is untenable. The Russians brought this upon themselves. The Russians that fight in Ukraine are volunteers. They sign up for it. The ones that don't are the mobilized Ukrainians in occupied territory.
I think it's better to have Russia as a working, not an ally, but a working relationship with them and be able to do that diplomatically and make deals, which Trump seems to be able to do with both Zelensky and Putin, where
Why hasn't
Democrats
any
seem to just
American
bow
negotiator
the
visited
knee.
Ukraine? Like Steve Witkoff, Scott Bassett, Jared Kushner, Donald Trump, JD Vance, like none of them have even stepped foot in Ukraine. And I'm supposed to believe we're anywhere close to an actual peace deal. It's very hard. It's very hard for me to take seriously when the war, in my view, like I hear it expanding every night. So like
Under Trump,
well, I see in this report and that report. Well, I want to see that actuated, because they've been saying that Trump has said that peace is around the corner since day one. So like, why am I supposed to believe that this isn't the little boy?
because now Putin is declaring victory. Putin is declaring victory. Putin is showing more respect to Zelensky. Zelensky wore a suit, so there's signs that it's moving
I
in the
don't
right
consider
direction.
those like serious indicators. I think a serious indicator would be Russian advances slow to a crawl. They're meeting directly
going
with
backwards.
the Ukrainians on a presidential by
losing.
presidential basis, and American negotiators actually go to Ukraine to talk to them about settlements. But like, these are indicators we haven't seen. It's the same indicators on repeat over and over and over again. We've had like 7, 8, 9 visits by Trump's delegation to Russia. We've had 0 visits to. It's just, I need to see some serious signals.
Assuming the graphs that I saw,
read tea leaves.
Assuming the graphs that I saw are correct, over the past 6 months, Russians' advancement of their territory has gone down to 0, and now it's going backwards. They're losing land over the last.
Again, I don't believe they're losing land, but they are, like, a lot of these are positions that have been misreported by war bloggers that aren't anywhere near the front line. But it is true that their advances are slowing. That's still, like, their advances have slowed before.
Can I ask a question about that, Dylan? I have a question about this. So, because you guys were talking about this earlier, and I've heard that this happens every time the summer comes around because of the terrain in Russia. When the ground's not frozen, it's harder for them to move on this terrain. So every time it comes to the summertime, they slow down their attacking because they don't want to go and get tanks swamped out there and stuck and shit. Is that a real pattern that happens? Or
the weapons in Ukraine?
No, in Russia. Like I've heard that because of the terrain in Russia, that every time the summer is around, like when the weather's warmer, because they don't want to get tanks stuck out in the field and whatnot, they slow down their attacks.
That was more true maybe in 22, 23, 24 as it went into the summer months and they tried to like get around it, but the biggest issue, honestly, has to do with like trees and greenery, where if you're an infantryman right now and Russia's tactics is mainly infiltration, you have 2, 3 guys go in at a time and you try to build them up to a larger squad that can eventually attack Ukrainian entrenched positions. That requires a lot of cover or very fast infiltration and rotation, which comes with very, very high casualties. But if you have trees to hide under, if you have trees to hide your artillery pieces in, if you have bushes that you can crawl under and do all this, your survivability goes way up. I'm much more comfortable moving around on the Konstantinivka axis a week ago than I would have been 3 months ago. 3 months ago, I don't know how comfortable I would have been walking around for like 22 kilometers because there wouldn't have been enough tree cover and it would have been much more dangerous, even though it was plenty dangerous. So I think that is a big contributor at this stage in the war, since there's not a mechanized offensive. So really, we're talking about like the pace of like foot speed for advances at this point.
Hey, I gotta head out easy.
That actually makes sense. All right, thank you for coming, JS. Tell everybody where they find you.
JS Urban Adventures, Monday night, news and current events on the Dreaded Conservative Show, and then Friday and Saturday streams, and then throughout the week in the morning time when I get off work, I'll do little things here and there. So subscribe, hit the bell, all that good stuff. Thank you a lot, Dylan. I didn't come in here trying to like destroy Dylan Burns because I'm nowhere near as knowledgeable on this stuff as you are. But I still stand by my side that I don't believe that we're obligated to support them. Maybe it's the right thing to do. You know a lot more about it, but you shouldn't obligate all of us to have more death on our hands. I'd rather have less wars and less deaths, whether they be Russian or Ukrainian, on my hands. But thank you, Easy. Thank you, Dylan. I'm gonna head out, guys. Later.
You can also almost always find JS over on Verbal Combat Friday, baby.
Oh yeah. Always on Verbal Combat. You should come by sometime, Dylan.
Sure.
Yeah.
My DMs and emails open to any invite, really.
All right. Later. Yep.
You should. Verbal combats on Fridays. They're fun. You'd probably have fun. in
Yes.
there.
Yeah, I just want to know what's the obligation that I have to support Orthodox brothers killing each other? Why should I
I
support either
agree,
side of this
yeah.
war?
I want an answer to that too.
Like, what's the
It's
moral obligation I have to
Obligation
support
of the
this?
state. Of the obligation of the state.
No, what's the moral
I mean,
obligation?
I'm not a, I don't know how much of, I'm not an Orthodox brother, but I am an American, and Americans pay taxes, and Americans vote in a republic, and when the republic
We don't have a
decides-
republic anymore, dude. The republic